Danger close. Chapter 1. The USS Leviathan cut through the Sea of Japan like a blade through black silk, her hull slicing the swells 20 miles off the North Korean coast. Brill Wingfield stood at the ship's rail, watching the horizon where enemy territory lay hidden in the pre-dawn darkness. Salt spray misted his face. The water looked cold enough to kill a man in minutes. "You the spook?" Brill turned. A young seaman stood behind him, maybe 22, with the kind of eager face that hadn't seen enough of the world to know when to keep his mouth shut. "I'm a passenger," Brill said. "Right." The kid grinned. "My buddy in communications says you got no file. No records. Like you don't exist. Your buddy talks too much." The seaman's grin faded. Something in Brill's voice, maybe the way he said it without looking away from the water, made the kid step back. "Yes, sir." "Sorry, sir." Brill watched him walk away, then returned his attention to the horizon. The kid was right, though. No file meant no trail. No trail meant no accountability. And no accountability meant the kind of mission that never officially happened. The kind Brill specialized in. He moved away from the rail and headed below deck. The ship's corridors were painted navy gray and smelled of diesel fuel and industrial cleaning solvent. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light. Sailors stepped aside as he passed, not because they knew who he was, but because they could sense what he was. A predator moving through their world. The briefing room was located 2 decks down, past the mess hall where the night watch grabbed coffee and complained about the food. Brill found it easily. He'd studied the ship's layout during the helicopter ride from Busan. The door was marked "Authorized Personnel Only" in stenciled letters. He wasn't authorized. He never was. Inside, a single table dominated the small space. Manila folders were spread across its surface, along with satellite photographs and tactical maps. The photos showed faces, 4 men in Navy dress uniforms, formal portraits that would look at home in obituaries. SEAL Team 6. The best America had to offer. Now they were either dead or wishing they were. Brill picked up the first photograph. Chief Petty Officer Martinez, team leader. Puerto Rican, 34 years old, 3 tours in Afghanistan. Distinguished Service Cross recipient. Married with 2 kids in Virginia Beach. The next photo showed Petty Officer Shen, the team's demolitions expert. Chinese American, 28, born in San Francisco. His parents had fled Beijing after Tiananmen Square. Shen had joined the Navy to serve the country that gave his family freedom. Petty Officer Williams came next. Sniper and communications specialist. Black kid from Detroit who'd chosen the military over the streets. 26 years old, engaged to his high school sweetheart. The last photo was Petty Officer Jackson, the team's medic. 31, from a farm in Iowa. He joined the Navy to see the world, and ended up seeing too much of it. 4 good men. 4 dead men, if the intel was right. Brill set the photos aside, and studied the satellite images of the North Korean coast. The insertion point was marked with a red X, a rocky stretch of beach north of Wonsan where the mountains met the sea. The terrain looked brutal, jagged cliffs, dense forest, and probably mined to hell. Perfect for a ghost to disappear into. The door opened behind him. Captain Reynolds stepped inside, his face grim. The man looked like he'd aged 10 years since their brief introduction on the flight deck. "Mr. Wingfield." Reynolds closed the door and activated the electronic lock. "I assume you've reviewed the materials." "Some of them." Brill tapped the satellite photos. "Where's the rest?" "What rest?" "Guard rotations. Facility layouts. Communication schedules. Weather patterns. Tide charts." Brill looked up from the photos. "The stuff that keeps people alive." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "That's not available." "Not available or not shared?" "Both." Brill nodded. It figured. The Pentagon loved to send people into harm's way with half the information they needed. Made the successful missions look more impressive on paper. "Tell me about the defector," Brill said. Colonel Park Min-jun, North Korean Intelligence Service. He reached out through back channels 3 months ago, claimed he had information about their nuclear program. High-value stuff. What kind of information? Facility locations. Security protocols. Names of scientists and engineers. Reynolds pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. The kind of intelligence that could set their program back 10 years. So you sent a SEAL team to pick him up. Standard extraction protocol. 4-man team, in and out, minimal footprint. Except, it wasn't minimal. Reynolds flinched. The mission was compromised from the start. We think Park was a double agent, or maybe he was turned after making contact. Either way, the SEALs walked into a trap. Brill studied the captain's face. The man was holding something back, but then again, they always were. What happened to the team? Captured. All 4 of them. Reynolds paused. They're being held at a military compound outside Hamhung. Intelligence suggests they're being used for propaganda purposes before being transferred to Pyongyang. How long do we have? 48 hours. Maybe less. Brill absorbed this. 48 hours to penetrate North Korea, locate the compound, extract 4 prisoners and get them back to international waters. All without starting World War III. Just another day at the office. What about Park? Unknown. He could be dead, or he could be with the SEALs. Your mission is to determine his status and neutralize the threat. Neutralize how? Reynolds met his eyes. No bodies, no crimes, no witnesses. That's the order from the top. Brill understood. If Park was alive, he died. If the SEALs were alive, they came home. And if anyone got in the way, they disappeared. Equipment? Minimal. Whatever you can carry during the insertion. Reynolds slid a waterproof bag across the table. Standard loadout plus some special items. Brill opened the bag and examined the contents. Suppressed pistol, tactical knife, night vision goggles, communications gear, medical supplies, and enough explosives to level a small building. Everything he needed to kill quietly and efficiently. Insertion is at 0200 hours, Reynolds said. Submarine will take you to within 2 miles of the coast. After that, you're on your own. Extraction? Same beach, 72 hours from insertion. Miss the window, and you're walking home. Brill closed the bag and stood. I'll need access to the ship's armory. Already arranged. Anything else? Coffee. Black. Reynolds almost smiled. I'll have someone bring it to your quarters. I don't have quarters. You do now. Deck 7, compartment 147. It's private. Brill nodded and headed for the door. As he reached for the handle, Reynolds spoke again. Mr. Wingfield? Those are good men in there. The best. I know. Bring them home. Brill looked back at the captain. I'll bring home what I can. He left Reynolds sitting alone with the photographs of 4 dead men who might still be breathing. Time to change that. Chapter 2. The USS Pittsburgh lay dead in the water 2 miles off the North Korean coast, her black hull invisible against the moonless night. Brill stood in the submarine's torpedo room, checking his gear one last time. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and machine oil. First time in a Mark 8 SDV. Lieutenant Commander Hayes asked. Brill looked up from his dive computer. Hayes was the submarine's executive officer, a thin man with intelligent eyes who'd been watching Brill like he was some kind of exotic animal. No. Right. Hayes nodded. Of course not. The sealed delivery vehicle sat in the forward escape trunk, looking like a black torpedo with a cockpit. 22 feet of aluminum and fiberglass that would carry Brill through hostile waters to a hostile shore. The thing had all the aerodynamic qualities of a brick and made about as much noise underwater as a garbage disposal. Perfect for sneaking up on people who wanted to kill you. Brill sealed his equipment in waterproof containers and clipped them to his dive harness. The pistol went in one bag, the explosives in another. The knife stayed on his belt where he could reach it quickly. In the water, everything was about speed and angles. Hesitate for a second, and you were dead. Currents running east to west at about 3 knots, Hayes said. Should push you right into the landing zone. Should. Will? I've run these waters before. Brill finished his gear check and looked at Hayes. When? That's classified. So is this. Hayes smiled. Fair enough. 3 times in the past 2 years. Inserted ROC Marines for reconnaissance missions. The current's predictable in this area. What about patrols? North Korean patrol boats run regular sweeps, but they stick to established patterns. We've been monitoring their radio chatter. Nothing unusual tonight. Brill nodded and pulled on his diving hood. The neoprene was cold against his skin, but it would keep him alive in the frigid water. The Sea of Japan in October was cold enough to kill an unprotected man in 20 minutes. One more thing, Hayes said. There's a weather front moving in from the west. Might get rough on the surface. How rough? 8 to 10 foot swells. Nothing the SDV can't handle, but it'll make your insertion more interesting. Brill smiled. Interesting was military speak for likely to kill you. The torpedo room's deck plating vibrated under his feet as the submarine's crew prepared for launch. Somewhere above, sonar operators tracked North Korean vessels while radio intercept specialists listened to enemy communications. The Pittsburgh was packed with electronic surveillance equipment that could hear a whisper from 50 miles away. But none of that technology could help him once he left the submarine. Final systems check, Hayes announced. Brill climbed into the SDV's pilot seat and began the startup sequence. The battery indicators showed full power. Life support systems were operational. Navigation computer was locked onto the GPS coordinates for the landing zone. Everything looked good. Too good. In Brill's experience, missions that looked perfect on paper usually went to hell the moment you left the wire. But you planned for perfection and adapted to chaos. That was the job. SDV ready for launch, he reported. Roger that. Hayes moved to the intercom. Control, this is torpedo room. Ready for launch sequence. The submarine's captain responded immediately. Torpedo room, control. You are cleared for launch. Good hunting. Hayes sealed the escape trunk and began flooding it with seawater. The metal walls groaned as external pressure equalized with the ocean outside. Brill watched the water level rise past the SDV's cockpit, then felt the vehicle float free of its cradle. Launching in 3, 2, 1. Mark. The escape trunk's outer door opened, and Brill fired the SDV's electric motor. The vehicle shot out of the submarine like a bullet from a gun, diving toward the ocean floor 60 feet below. The water was black as ink. Brill switched on the SDV's sonar and began following the seafloor toward shore. The bottom was rocky and uneven, scarred by underwater canyons that could hide a fleet. Perfect terrain for an ambush. He kept the vehicle's speed at 5 knots, fast enough to make good time but slow enough to avoid detection. The electric motor was virtually silent, but it threw off a magnetic signature that sophisticated sensors could track. And the North Koreans had some very sophisticated sensors. 20 minutes into the run, the sonar picked up something large moving through the water ahead. Brill cut the motor and let the SDV drift while he studied the contact. It was moving too fast to be a fish and too slow to be a torpedo. Patrol boat. He watched the contact pass overhead, heading east toward the open ocean. The boat's sonar swept the water in regular patterns, but the operators were looking for submarines, not a single diver hugging the bottom. Brill waited until the contact disappeared, then restarted the motor and continued toward shore. The water began to shoal as he approached the coast. Rocky outcroppings rose from the seafloor like tombstones, and the current grew stronger as it funneled between underwater ridges. The SDV bucked and rolled in the turbulence, fighting to maintain course. Brill checked his navigation display. 1 mile to the beach. The sonar screen lit up with new contacts. Small, fast-moving objects that looked like patrol boats, but moved in coordinated patterns. Too coordinated to be random patrols. They were searching for something. Maybe they'd detected the submarine's approach. Maybe they'd intercepted communications about the mission. Or maybe they were just running a routine sweep that happened to coincide with the worst possible timing. Brill counted 6 contacts, all moving toward his position. In 10 minutes, they'd be directly overhead. He had 2 choices: abort the mission and return to the submarine, or continue toward shore and hope the patrol boats missed him. The first option was safe. The second option was suicide. Brill chose suicide. He pushed the SDV's throttle to maximum and dove toward the seafloor. The vehicle's hull groaned under the pressure as he descended to 90 feet, then 100, then 110. The safety margin was 120 feet. Beyond that, the hull would implode. The patrol boats passed overhead like thunder. Their sonar pulses hammered the water, each one strong enough to rupture a man's eardrums. But they were looking for large targets, not a single vehicle hiding in the rocks. Brill waited until the last contact disappeared, then began his ascent. The water grew lighter as he approached the surface, changing from black to deep blue to gray. Stars appeared overhead, scattered across the sky like broken glass. The beach was a narrow strip of sand and rock between the ocean and towering cliffs. Waves crashed against the shore with enough force to break bones, driven by the approaching storm. The wind was picking up, turning the surface into a maze of whitecaps. Brill beached the SDV in the surf and quickly unloaded his equipment. The vehicle would sink itself in deep water, leaving no trace of his arrival. He had 72 hours to complete the mission and return to this exact spot. 72 hours to find 4 men in a country that wanted to kill him. He shouldered his gear and began climbing the cliff face. The rock was wet and slippery, carved by centuries of wind and rain into treacherous handholds. Each step required total concentration. A fall from this height would leave him broken on the rocks below. Above him, North Korea waited in the darkness. A country where strangers were shot on sight and questions were asked later. Where the wrong word could get you executed, and the right word could get you executed faster. Brill pulled himself over the cliff's edge and onto solid ground. Pine trees stretched in all directions, their branches whispering in the wind. The air smelled of salt and forest loam. He was in enemy territory now. From this moment forward, every person he met would try to kill him. Every sound could be his last warning. Every shadow could hide a rifle. He grinned and melted into the forest. Chapter 3. Brill moved through the pine forest like smoke, his boots finding purchase on the needle-covered ground without making a sound. The trees were old-growth Korean pine, their trunks thick enough to hide a man and their branches high enough to filter moonlight into scattered silver coins. He'd been walking for 3 hours. The safe house was supposed to be 8 kilometers inland, tucked into a valley where the mountains met cultivated fields. Intelligence had described it as a traditional Korean farmhouse, abandoned since the owner fled south during the war. The kind of place where a defector could wait for extraction without drawing attention. The kind of place that made a perfect trap. Brill stopped beside a massive pine and listened. Wind moved through the branches overhead, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something else. Something that made his skin crawl. Death. He pulled out his night vision goggles and scanned the forest ahead. The green-tinted world revealed nothing unusual, just trees and undergrowth and the narrow trail that wound down toward the valley. But his nose didn't lie. Something was rotting in the darkness ahead. Maybe an animal. Maybe not. Brill continued down the trail, moving from tree to tree, pausing to listen before each advance. The smell grew stronger as he descended, mixing with the forest scents until it became a physical presence in his nostrils. The trail opened into a small clearing, where the farmhouse sat like a cancerous growth. Traditional Korean architecture, with curved roof tiles and wooden walls that had weathered to the color of old bones. Windows stared out at the forest like empty eye sockets. The front door hung open. Brill circled the clearing twice, checking for signs of recent activity. Boot prints in the mud led from the forest to the house and back again. Too many prints for a single person. Too organized for random patrol. Someone had been here with a purpose. He approached the house from the rear, staying low and moving fast across the open ground. The back door was closed but unlocked. Brill tested the handle slowly, feeling for tension that might indicate a tripwire or pressure plate. Nothing. The door opened on well-oiled hinges, revealing a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Dust covered everything: the wooden table, the iron cookstove, the ceramic jars that lined the walls. But the dust had been disturbed recently. Footprints tracked across the floor, leading from the kitchen to the main room. Brill followed the prints, his pistol drawn and ready. The main room was traditional Korean style, with floor mats and a low table surrounded by cushions. Papers were scattered across the table and floor, mixed with overturned furniture and broken pottery. Signs of a struggle. He knelt beside the table and examined the papers. Most were written in Korean, but a few were in English. Technical documents about nuclear reactor design. Facility blueprints. Personnel rosters. The intelligence Colonel Park had promised to deliver. Brill gathered the papers and stuffed them into his pack. Whatever had happened here, Park had been carrying valuable information. Information that 4 SEALs had died trying to protect. A floorboard creaked behind him. Brill spun, pistol raised, and found himself staring at nothing. The room was empty, but the sound had been real. Old houses settled and shifted, but this had been different. Deliberate. Don't shoot. The voice came from the shadows near the far wall. Korean accent, but the English was clear. A man stepped into the light, hands raised, moving slowly. He was thin and middle-aged, with graying hair and intelligent eyes. Blood stained his shirt, and his left arm hung at an unnatural angle. But he was alive. Colonel Park. Yes. Park moved closer, favoring his right leg. You are American? I'm here to get you out. Park laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Too late for that. They found me 2 days ago. Who found you? State security. They knew about the meeting. They knew about the Americans. Park collapsed into a chair, his breathing labored. It was a trap from the beginning. Brill lowered his pistol, but kept it ready. What happened to the SEAL team? Captured. All 4 of them. Park's eyes were bright with fever. They fought well, but there were too many soldiers. The team leader, Martinez, he told me to run. Said his people would come back for me. Where are they now? Military compound, outside Hamhung. They're being held there until transport arrives to take them to Pyongyang. Park coughed, and blood appeared on his lips. They have maybe 1 day before the transfer. What about security at the compound? Heavy. 200 soldiers, maybe more. Automated defenses. It's designed to hold political prisoners before they disappear forever. Brill studied Park's wounds. The man was dying, slowly but surely. Internal bleeding, probably. A punctured lung, definitely. He had hours at most. There's something else, Park said. The Americans, they're being used for propaganda. Filmed making confessions. The footage will be broadcast tomorrow night. What kind of confessions? Admitting to espionage. Revealing American military secrets. The kind of thing that will destroy their families and disgrace their service. Brill felt cold anger building in his chest. Using captured soldiers for propaganda was bad enough. Forcing them to betray their country was worse. I have maps, Park continued. Facility layouts. Guard rotations. Everything you need to get inside. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a rolled bundle of papers. His hand shook as he offered them to Brill. Why are you helping me? Because I'm already dead. But those men, they still have a chance. Park's voice was getting weaker. My wife and daughter are in Seoul. If I die here, they'll be safe. If I'm captured alive. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Brill took the papers and studied them quickly. The compound was built into a hillside, with multiple levels and reinforced positions. Getting inside would be difficult. Getting out with 4 prisoners would be nearly impossible. There's a drainage tunnel, Park said. It runs from the compound to the river. Built during construction but never sealed. The maps show the entrance. How do you know about it? I designed the compound's security system 5 years ago, before I decided to defect. Park smiled bitterly. I know every entrance, every weakness, every way to get inside without being detected. And you're willing to give me this information? I'm willing to die for it. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Then another. The sound was moving closer, coming from the direction of the main road. Patrol, Park whispered. They come here every night, looking for me. I've been hiding in the forest, but... He gestured at his wounds. Running and hiding were no longer options. How many? 6 soldiers. 2 dogs. They'll be here in 5 minutes. Brill looked around the room, calculating angles and distances. The house had 2 exits, but both led to open ground. The windows were small and high, offering limited escape routes. Is there a cellar? Yes. Behind the kitchen. But it's not deep. They'll find us. They won't find us. They'll find you. Park understood immediately. Yes. That's right. Can you make it to the cellar? I think so. Brill helped Park to his feet and supported him as they moved toward the kitchen. The cellar entrance was hidden beneath a trap door covered by a woven mat. The space below was cramped and dark, barely large enough for 2 people. When they find you, Brill said, tell them you've been here alone. Tell them you're dying. Tell them anything except the truth. And if they torture me? You'll tell them what they want to hear. But by then, I'll be long gone. Park nodded. The drainage tunnel. Remember. It's your only way inside. The dogs were getting closer. Brill could hear voices now, speaking in Korean. Commands and responses. The sound of organized search. One more thing, Park said. The team leader, Martinez. He has a daughter. 8 years old. If you see him again, I'll tell him. No. Tell him she's proud of him. Tell him he's coming home. Brill closed the trap door and scattered the mat to cover it. He moved through the house quickly, erasing signs of his presence and creating a trail that led to the front door. Then he slipped out the back and into the forest. The patrol arrived 30 seconds later. Brill watched from the tree line as soldiers surrounded the house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The dogs were German shepherds, trained to track human scent across any terrain. They found Park within minutes. Brill didn't wait to see what happened next. He'd seen enough interrogations to know how this one would end. Park would die here, in the house where he'd tried to make his deal with America. Die protecting information that might save 4 men he'd never met. The kind of death that meant something. Brill turned away and began walking toward Hamhung. He had the maps, he had the intel, and he had less than 24 hours to use them. Time to see if Park's sacrifice was worth it. Chapter 4. Brill found Park's body 3 hours later, dumped in an irrigation ditch beside the main road to Hamhung. The North Koreans had worked him over with fists and rifle butts before putting a bullet in his head. Professional interrogation, but quick. They'd been more interested in confirming he was alone than extracting information. That was good. It meant Park had died without talking. Brill crouched beside the ditch and studied the scene. Tire tracks in the mud showed where a military truck had stopped. Boot prints led from the vehicle to the body and back again. The soldiers had been efficient. Kill the defector, dump the body, move on to the next patrol sector. No ceremony. No respect for the dead. Just another night's work in the workers' paradise. Brill checked his watch. 0347 hours. Dawn was still 3 hours away, but the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. He needed to reach the compound before full daylight, when North Korean patrols would be out in force. The road to Hamhung was paved but cracked, with weeds growing through the asphalt. Telephone poles lined the route, their wires sagging between crooked posts. In the distance, smokestacks rose against the sky like accusing fingers. Industrial city. Military installations. The kind of place where strangers were noticed and questions were asked. Brill left the road and moved through the fields, keeping to the shadows cast by irrigation canals and farm buildings. The countryside was rural Korea at its most basic: rice paddies, vegetable plots, and small farmhouses where entire families lived in 2 rooms. Most of the buildings were dark, but a few showed lights in the windows. Early risers, preparing for another day of state-mandated labor. Or maybe insomniacs who couldn't sleep in a country where the wrong dream could get you shot. The compound appeared as Brill crested a low hill. Park's intelligence had been accurate. The facility was built into a hillside, with concrete walls and guard towers that commanded the surrounding terrain. Spotlights swept the perimeter in regular patterns, and Brill could see sentries moving along the walls. He pulled out his binoculars and studied the layout. The main gate was positioned at the bottom of the hill, with a guardhouse and vehicle barrier. 2 guard towers flanked the gate, their searchlights covering the approach road. The compound itself was divided into sections: administrative buildings, barracks, and what looked like a detention facility built into the hillside. That's where they'd be holding the SEALs. Brill found a position in a grove of pine trees about 500 meters from the compound. The trees provided concealment and a clear view of the target. He settled in for a long watch, knowing that patience was often the difference between success and death. The guard rotation changed at 0400 hours. Brill counted 12 sentries on the walls, plus whatever forces were stationed inside the buildings. The guards moved in pairs, checking in with the command post every 30 minutes via radio. Professional security. Well-trained and well-equipped. At 0500 hours, a convoy of trucks arrived at the main gate. Military vehicles, painted in the drab green of the North Korean Army. Brill watched through his binoculars as the trucks were searched and their occupants questioned. Standard procedure, but it gave him valuable intelligence about the compound's security protocols. The sun was rising now, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and red. Beautiful morning in one of the ugliest places on Earth. Brill was preparing to move to a new observation point when he heard voices approaching through the trees. Korean voices, speaking in the casual tones of men who weren't expecting trouble. He slipped behind a large pine and waited. 2 soldiers appeared on the trail, walking slowly and carrying their rifles carelessly. They were young, maybe 20 years old, with the soft faces of city boys who'd never seen real combat. Their uniforms were clean and pressed, their boots polished to mirror brightness. Rear echelon troops. Probably assigned to perimeter patrol because someone thought it would be safe. They were wrong. The soldiers stopped about 10 meters from Brill's position. One of them lit a cigarette while the other checked his watch. They were taking a break, probably halfway through their patrol route. American prisoners, the first soldier said in Korean. I heard they arrived yesterday. 4 of them, the second soldier replied. Special forces. They look dangerous, even beaten up. What will happen to them? Transfer to Pyongyang tomorrow. Then execution, probably. Or maybe labor camp. The soldier shrugged. Not our problem. I heard they're making propaganda films. Confessions. Yes. Tonight, I think. The political officers are very excited. Brill absorbed this information while calculating distances and angles. The soldiers were relaxed, distracted by their conversation. Easy targets. But killing them would alert the compound's security. Dead sentries meant a search, and a search meant his mission was compromised before it began. Better to let them live. The soldiers finished their cigarettes and continued along the trail. Brill waited until they were out of sight, then moved deeper into the forest. He needed to circle around to the compound's eastern side, where Park's maps showed the drainage tunnel entrance. The terrain was rocky and steep, covered with dense undergrowth that grabbed at his clothing and equipment. Perfect for concealment, but it made movement slow and difficult. Every step had to be calculated to avoid loose rocks or branches that might snap underfoot. It took him 2 hours to reach the drainage tunnel. The entrance was exactly where Park had indicated, a concrete culvert built into the hillside, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. The tunnel mouth was about 3 feet in diameter, large enough for a man to crawl through but too small for vehicles. Brill examined the entrance carefully. No sensors that he could see. No tripwires or pressure plates. The tunnel had been forgotten, just as Park had said. He pulled out a small flashlight and peered into the darkness. The tunnel stretched ahead for about 50 meters before turning sharply to the right. The floor was covered with several inches of stagnant water that smelled of rust and decay. Perfect place for an ambush. Brill checked his equipment one more time, then began crawling into the tunnel. The water soaked through his clothing immediately, cold and foul-smelling. The concrete walls were slick with moisture and covered with some kind of organic growth that felt like wet leather. Halfway through the tunnel, he heard something that made him freeze. Voices. Coming from ahead. He turned off his flashlight and listened. 2 men speaking in Korean. Their voices echoed off the tunnel walls, making it difficult to determine their exact location. Check the drainage system every day, one voice was saying. Orders from the commander. Waste of time, the second voice replied. Who would use a sewer to break into a military compound? Someone crazy enough to try. Brill smiled in the darkness. Someone exactly that crazy. He drew his knife and continued forward, moving even more slowly now. The voices grew louder as he approached the tunnel's end. Through the darkness he could see a faint light, probably from the guards' flashlights. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, part of the compound's drainage system. 2 soldiers stood near the exit, their backs to Brill's position. They were conducting a routine security check, sweeping their flashlights across the concrete walls and floor. Routine was good. Routine meant they weren't expecting trouble. Brill rose from the water like a ghost, his knife moving in precise, economical motions. The first soldier died without making a sound, the blade sliding between his ribs and into his heart. The second soldier started to turn, but Brill's hand clamped over his mouth while the knife found his throat. Both bodies went into the water with barely a splash. Brill dragged them deeper into the tunnel, where they wouldn't be found during the next security check. Then he moved toward the chamber's exit, following the sound of machinery and distant voices. The drainage chamber connected to a maintenance corridor that ran beneath the compound's main buildings. Pipes and electrical conduits lined the walls, and the air smelled of diesel fuel and industrial cleaning solvent. Brill consulted Park's maps and oriented himself. The detention facility was directly above him, built into the hillside's natural rock formation. According to the intelligence, the SEALs were being held in individual cells on the facility's lower level. Getting to them would require passing through multiple security checkpoints and avoiding dozens of guards. In a normal military operation, it would take a full company of soldiers supported by airstrikes and artillery. Brill was planning to do it alone. He found a ventilation shaft that led to the upper levels and began climbing. The shaft was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for his shoulders. Metal brackets provided handholds, but they were old and corroded. One wrong move, and he'd fall back into the drainage system. The shaft ended at a grate that opened into a storage room. Brill peered through the slats and saw stacks of military supplies, uniforms, boots, field equipment. The room was empty, but he could hear footsteps in the corridor beyond. Brill removed the grate and slipped into the storage room. The detention facility was somewhere above him, along with 4 men who were counting on him to get them home. 4 men who didn't even know he existed. Chapter 5. The air in the storage room was thick with the smell of mothballs and cheap canvas. Brill stood motionless in the dark, letting the sounds of the compound filter in, building a map in his head. Boots on concrete, the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of a soldier pacing his route. The distant, asthmatic cough of a diesel generator. A shouted order in Korean, the tone more bored than authoritative. This was the pulse of the place. He needed to learn its rhythm before he could stop its heart. Park's maps were a skeleton. Now Brill had to put flesh on the bones. He moved to the far end of the room, past stacked crates of ill-fitting uniforms and boots that looked like they'd lose a fight with a puddle. A single grime-caked window sat high on the wall, overlooking a central courtyard. It was a terrible vantage point. Too low, too exposed. He needed height. His eyes scanned the ceiling. A network of pipes and conduits crisscrossed the space, thick with dust. One large ventilation duct, big enough to crawl through, ran the length of the room and disappeared through the wall into the main corridor. It was his way up. Brill climbed a stack of crates, the wood groaning under his weight. He tested the duct's supports. They were solid steel, bolted directly to the ceiling joists. He pulled himself up, his pack scraping against the metal, and found the access panel. 4 simple screws. Amateurs. He had them out in 30 seconds with his multi-tool. The inside of the duct was a black, echoing throat. He slid the panel back into place, leaving it unscrewed for a quick exit, and began to crawl. The metal was cold, and the air tasted of rust and stale air. He moved by feel, his hands and knees finding the seams in the metal. After 20 yards, he came to a vertical shaft. He climbed, his back pressed against one side, his feet walking up the other, until he reached another horizontal section. He followed it, counting the vents he passed, listening. The third vent offered gold. He pressed his ear to the grate. Muffled voices. A typewriter clacking, the sound an antique in a digital world. An office. He peered through the slats. It was a logistics office, 3 floors up. A fat major with a face like a spoiled turnip sat behind a metal desk, smoking a foul-smelling cigarette and staring at a wall map of the province. 2 clerks worked at smaller desks, their heads bent over paperwork. The window behind the major's desk looked out over the entire compound. It was perfect. Brill waited. He had the patience of a stone. An hour passed. The clerks took a break. The major made a phone call, arguing with someone about a fuel shipment. Brill learned the major's name was Kim, that he had a wife who spent too much money, and that the generator for the West Wall searchlights was unreliable. All good things to know. Finally, the office emptied for the midday meal. The fat major locked the door from the outside. A joke of a lock that Brill could have picked with a paperclip. He didn't need to. He removed the vent cover, dropped silently to the floor, and crossed to the window. The view was everything he'd hoped for. From here, he could see it all. The main gate, and the 2 flanking guard towers. The barracks, with soldiers lounging outside, smoking, cleaning weapons. The motor pool, where a handful of mechanics worked on a truck that had seen better days during the Korean War. And there, built into the rock of the hillside, was the detention block. It was a concrete scar, windowless and brutal, with a single steel door and its own contingent of guards. These guards were different. They stood straighter, their rifles held with a casual familiarity the others lacked. They were professionals. Brill took out his monocular and began his work. He spent the next 2 hours mapping the world. Guard at the East Tower, Sergeant Pak, paced 20 steps, stopped, scanned with binoculars for exactly 30 seconds, then paced back. Predictable. A liability. The 2 guards at the detention block entrance, they never moved. Stood like statues. But the one on the left had a nervous tick, a constant glance over his shoulder toward the administration building. What was he afraid of? A supply truck rumbled through the main gate at 13:40, 10 minutes behind its usual schedule, according to the argument Major Kim had been having. The gate guards did a thorough search of the cab, but only gave the cargo bed a cursory glance. A weak point. He sketched it all in his mind, the patterns and the people, the strengths and the flaws. The compound wasn't a fortress. It was a system run by bored, tired men. And any system could be broken. At 1500, the rhythm changed. A new energy buzzed through the compound. 2 soldiers ran from the administration building to the detention block. The guards there snapped to attention. A moment later, a man in a crisp officer's uniform, A political officer by his polished boots and self-important strut marched out of the main building. He was followed by two men carrying a heavy camera and a tripod. Brill focused the monocular. This was it. The steel door of the detention block opened. The four SEALs were shoved out into the courtyard. Even from 500 meters, their condition was clear. They were bruised, cut, and walked with the stiff, painful movements of men who'd been systematically beaten. But their heads were up. Chief Petty Officer Martinez was first. His face was a swollen mask, one eye closed completely, but he walked like he was leading his men onto a parade ground. He scanned the compound, his one good eye taking in the guards, the walls, the sky. It wasn't a look of despair. It was a look of calculation. Shen, the demolitions expert, had his arm in a crude sling. He favored his left leg, but his eyes were clear and full of a cold, quiet rage. Williams, the sniper, was next. They'd worked on his hands. His fingers were swollen, likely broken. They were trying to take his weapon away from him, piece by piece. Last came Jackson, the medic. He seemed to have taken the worst of it. He stumbled, and Shen caught him, holding him steady. The political officer, a colonel with a soft chin and cruel eyes, directed them to stand in a line in front of a concrete wall. The camera was set up. The colonel barked an order. Martinez didn't move. The colonel stepped up to him, his face inches from the SEALs. He spoke in low, menacing Korean. Brill didn't need to hear the words. He'd heard them in a dozen languages, in a dozen hellholes around the world. Cooperate, and the pain will stop. Defy me, and I will show you things you cannot imagine. Martinez stared straight ahead, through the colonel, through the wall, as if looking at something far away. Maybe the beach in Virginia, where his kids were playing. The colonel's face tightened. He slapped Martinez across the face, a sharp cracking sound that Brill felt more than heard. Martinez's head snapped to the side, but he didn't make a sound. He slowly turned his head back, a thin trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. He smiled. It was a terrible thing to see, that smile. It was all broken teeth and blood, and pure, unadulterated hate. It promised a reckoning. The colonel, flustered, stepped back. He smoothed his uniform and cleared his throat, turning to the camera. He began to speak, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. He was reading from a script, talking about the decadent American imperialists and their cowardly spies, caught trying to undermine the glorious People's Republic. He gestured to Martinez. Now, the leader of this criminal cell, Chief Petty Officer Martinez, will confess his crimes against the people of Korea. He held a microphone out. The courtyard was silent, except for the hum of the generator and the wind whistling past the corner of the building. Martinez looked at the microphone. Then he looked at the camera, his one good eye zeroing in on the lens. "Go to hell," he said. The English was clear, calm, and resonant. The colonel's face went from pink to purple. He screamed an order. Two guards rushed forward with rifle butts. They went for Martinez's kidneys, then his legs. He folded, not with a cry, but with a grunt, a sudden exhalation of air. They hauled him back to his feet. The colonel turned to Shen. You will speak." Shen stared at him. He said something in perfect, fluent Mandarin. Whatever it was, it made the cameraman flinch and the colonel's eyes bulge. They beat Shen too. Then Williams. Then Jackson. None of them spoke a word of confession. They took the beating, got back on their feet, and stared at their captors with a unified silent contempt that was louder than any shouted defiance. They were a team. Even broken, they were a team. Brill lowered the monocular. The cold anger in his chest was a familiar friend. It didn't make him reckless. It made him focused. He wasn't here to neutralize a threat anymore. He wasn't here to clean up a mess for men in Washington. He was here to bring them home. The propaganda show was a failure. The furious colonel ordered the SEALs dragged back inside. The show was over. Brill now had what he needed. He knew the layout, the rotations, the weaknesses. He'd seen the men he was here to save, and he knew they were still in the fight. Time was running out. The transfer to Pyongyang was scheduled for the next day. He had one night. He moved away from the window, his mind already working on the next steps. He needed uniforms, weapons, identification, a diversion. He looked at the fat major's desk, at the phone, at the wall map. The procurement phase had just begun. Chapter 6. Brill put the vent cover back in place over the logistics office, the metal grate clicking softly into its frame. He didn't bother with the screws. He might need the root again. He crawled back through the blackness, a ghost in the machine, his movements sure and silent. He dropped back into the storage room, the dust motes dancing in the sliver of light from the grimy window. The compound was settling into its evening routine. The generator's cough was steadier now. The shouts from the barracks had turned into the murmur of men waiting for dinner. He slipped out the way he'd come in, through the maintenance corridor, and back into the foul-smelling water of the drainage tunnel. He didn't bother dragging the two dead guards deeper into the pipe. They wouldn't be found before morning, and by then it wouldn't matter. He emerged from the culvert into the cool evening air, the scent of pine a welcome relief from the rot and decay. The sun was setting, bleeding purple and orange across the horizon. He had to move. The fuel convoy Major Kim had been arguing about was his best chance. It was scheduled for an evening run to top off the generators and vehicles. It would be coming from a depot east of Hamhung, which meant it would use the secondary road that wound through the hills south of the compound. Brill moved parallel to the road, staying 100 yards inside the tree line. The road was little more than a dirt track, rutted and scarred from heavy use and neglect. He found his spot a mile from the compound, where the road curved sharply around a rocky outcrop. It was a natural blind spot, with dense woods on both sides. A good place for an ambush. Or a breakdown. He settled in to wait, becoming part of the landscape. An hour later, he heard it. The whine of a struggling engine, the clatter of loose metal. Headlights cut through the twilight. A ZIL 131, the snub-nosed Russian beast of a truck, came around the bend, followed by a second, this one a tanker. They were moving slow, the lead truck listing to one side. The lead truck hissed to a stop. The tanker pulled up 20 yards behind it. A door creaked open, and a man in a corporal's uniform jumped down. He was short and wiry, with a face that looked like it had been chiseled from granite and left out in the rain. He kicked the front right tire, then swore, a string of curses that were creative even by a soldier's standards. "Cho! Get out here," he yelled. The passenger door of the tanker opened, and a kid slid out. He couldn't have been more than 19. His uniform was too big for him, and he held his rifle like it was a snake that might bite him. The corporal, pointed at the flat tire with a disgusted flick of his wrist. "Look at this. Chinese garbage. The People's Republic sends us their best, they say. They send us tires made of compressed goat dung." "We have a spare, Corporal," Cho said, his voice a nervous squeak. "Of course we have a spare," snapped. "Do you think I've never seen a flat tire before? The point is, now we have to change it. In the dark. While the mosquitoes eat us alive for the glory of the dear leader." He slapped his neck, leaving a smear of blood. "Get the tools." Cho fumbled with the latch on the truck's toolbox while lit a cigarette, cupping his hands against a wind that didn't exist. He took a long drag, the ember glowing bright in the fading light. "You know what I'd be doing if I wasn't here, Cho." "No, Corporal. I'd be in the village. At Sonhwa's place. She has rice wine. The good kind, not the swill they serve in the mess. And her cousin is visiting from Wonsan. They say she has eyes like a doe." He sighed, a cloud of smoke and regret. "Instead, I am here with you and this monument to socialist engineering." Brill moved from the trees. He made no more sound than a shadow. Cho had the jack out, and was trying to figure out where to place it under the axle. He was on his knees, his rifle leaned against the flat tire. Corporal stood over him, smoking, offering unhelpful advice. "Not there, you idiot. You'll crack the axle housing. Put it here. No, here. Brill was 10 feet away. Then 5. Ree must have felt something, a change in the air, the primal instinct of being hunted. He started to turn, his cigarette halfway to his lips. He never completed the motion. Brill's arm circled Ree's neck, cutting off his air. The corporal's eyes went wide with surprise, above the hand clamped over his mouth. Brill's knife, already in his other hand, slid into the soft spot under Ree's ear, severing the carotid artery and spinal cord in one smooth, practiced motion. There was a brief, convulsive shudder, and then Corporal Ree was just dead weight. Brill lowered him to the ground without a sound. Cho was still on his knees, grunting with effort as he tried to work the jack. "Did you say something, Corporal?" Brill stepped over Ree's body. Cho looked up, his eyes trying to make sense of the new figure standing over him. His mouth opened to shout, but the sound was choked off as Brill's boot connected with his throat. The crunch of cartilage was sickeningly loud in the quiet woods. Cho collapsed, clutching his neck, his legs kicking in a spastic dance. Brill knelt and ended it with a quick thrust of his knife to the heart. 2 men dead in less than 10 seconds. No shots fired. No alarm raised. He dragged the bodies into the trees, hiding them under a thicket of thorny bushes where they wouldn't be found until the smell gave them away. He worked quickly, stripping them of their uniforms. Ree's was a near-perfect fit. Cho's was too small, but the jacket would do. He took their rifles, 2 Type 58s, North Korean copies of the Alaska 47. They were worn but clean, well-oiled. He checked the ammunition. Full magazines. He found their identification papers in their pockets. Corporal Ree Yongchul. Private Cho Min-soo. He studied the pictures, memorizing the faces, the birth dates, the unit numbers. From now on, he was Corporal Ree. He changed into the uniform, the rough fabric scratchy against his skin. It smelled faintly of stale tobacco and sweat. He slung the Type 58 over his shoulder. It felt natural, comfortable. He was one of them now. The tanker was his final objective. He walked back to the road, moving with the tired slouch of a soldier at the end of a long day. The driver of the lead truck hadn't even looked out of his cab. He was probably listening to the radio, half asleep. Brill circled around to the rear of the fuel tanker. The truck was a bomb waiting for a detonator. He pulled a block of C4 from his pack. It was a small 1-pound charge, but it was more than enough. He didn't want a massive explosion that would be seen for miles. He wanted a fire. A big, hot, chaotic fire that would draw every guard from the compound walls. He found the perfect spot, on the frame rail right next to the tank's main valve. A rupture there would turn the whole truck into a giant flamethrower. He pressed the plastic explosive into place, the putty-like substance sticking to the greasy metal. He inserted a radio detonator, a simple device with a 2-kilometer range. He checked the frequency, armed it, and blended it into the shadows of the truck's undercarriage. The whole process took less than a minute. He walked back to the lead truck and kicked the newly replaced tire. "It's done," he called out, his Korean flawless, pitched to mimic Corporal Ree's gravelly tone. The driver's side door opened. "What took so long? And where's the kid?" "He's taking a piss," Brill said, jerking his thumb toward the woods. "Ate something bad in the mess. His stomach is turning inside out." The driver grunted. "Tell him to hurry up. The political officer will have our hides if this fuel is late." "I'll get him." Brill turned and walked back toward the tanker, but instead of stopping, he kept going, melting back into the trees on the other side of the road. He heard the driver shout after him, an angry questioning sound. A moment later, a truck door slammed and the engine of the lead truck roared to life. The convoy started to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed as it headed toward the compound. Brill watched it go, a ghost in a stolen uniform. He checked the small remote detonator in his hand. The red light was on. Armed and ready. He turned and began walking toward the village Ree had mentioned. The one with the good rice wine, and the girl with eyes like a doe. He needed to get closer, to find a place to watch the fireworks. Chapter 7. The village huddled in the valley like a collection of old, tired men, bracing against the wind. It was a single dirt street lined with squat tile-roofed houses, their walls the color of mud and sorrow. A few dim lights glowed behind patched paper windows. The place smelled of wood smoke, kimchi, and resignation. In the center of town, a faded mural of the great leader, Kim Il-sung, beamed down with a benevolent smile that didn't reach his eyes, promising a paradise that never came. Brill walked down the middle of the street, the borrowed rifle slung over his shoulder, his boots scuffing the dirt. He was Corporal Ri Yongchul now, tired after a long shift, looking for a drink. He kept his shoulders slumped, his head down, the picture of a man beaten into submission by the sheer boredom of his existence. A few villagers, old women with faces like wrinkled apples, scurried out of his path, their eyes fixed on the ground. A soldier was a problem, even one who looked as defeated as he did. He found Song Hua's place easily. It was the only house with more than one light on, and the sound of a wheezing accordion spilled from its open door. It wasn't a bar. It was a living room, with a few extra tables crammed into it. A handful of off-duty soldiers from the compound sat on rickety stools, nursing bowls of milky white rice wine. A woman with a hard face and tired eyes, Song Hua presumably, moved between the tables, refilling bowls from a large ceramic jug. She didn't smile. Brill stepped inside. The accordion player, a man with a face like a dried pear, faltered for a second, then picked up his tune. All conversation stopped. The soldiers looked him over. He was a new face. New faces were trouble. He gave them a lazy, dismissive glance, the kind of look that said, "I'm one of you, and I don't care who you are." He nodded to Song Hua. "A bowl." She gestured to an empty stool in the corner. Brill took it, placing his rifle on the floor beside him. The stool wobbled. Song Hua brought the wine. It smelled like gasoline. He paid her with some of the currency he'd taken from the real Corporal Ri's pocket. She took the money without a word and went back to her jug. The conversation started up again, low and cautious. Brill sipped the wine. It tasted worse than it smelled, burning a trail down his throat. He let the burn settle in, listening. Two sergeants near the door were complaining about the new shipment of boots. A private was trying to impress Song Hua's niece, the girl with the doe eyes maybe, who was studiously ignoring him. Then Brill heard what he was waiting for. Another triple shift. On the lower level. Because the political officer is afraid the American pigs will somehow chew through the steel doors. The voice was slurred, angry. Brill turned his head slowly. The speaker was a guard named Kong, a big man with a fleshy face and small bitter eyes. He was already 3 bowls deep, and his uniform was unbuttoned at the collar. His companion, a younger, leaner man, looked nervous. "Kong, keep your voice down," the lean one Park said. "Someone will hear you." "Let them hear," Kong said, slamming his bowl down. Some of the wine sloshed onto the table. "What will they do? Send me to the detention block. I'm already there. I live there. I breathe the same stale air as those Yankee bastards." He waved at Song Hua. Another. Brill waited until Kong had his fresh bowl. He picked up his own bowl and rifle and walked over to their table. "This stool is about to give out," he said, gesturing back to his corner. "Mind if I join you?" Kong looked him up and down. "I know you." "Corporal Ri. Transport Division," Brill said. "Just got in with the fuel convoy." Recognition flickered in Kang's eyes. Transport was a better gig than guard duty. "Ah. The fuel. The major was screaming about you being late." "We had a flat," Brill said, sitting down. "Chinese tire. Garbage." This was something Kong could understand. "Garbage," he agreed, nodding vigorously. "Everything is garbage. The food. The boots. The orders." He leaned in, his breath a foul mix of wine and garlic. "You know what they had us do today? Stand there while they tried to film those Americans. A big propaganda moment. A glorious victory for the people." "I heard it didn't go well," Brill said, taking a sip of his wine. "Go well?" Kong let out a short, barking laugh. The tall one, the leader, he told Colonel Pak to go to hell. In English. The one whose parents were traitors spoke Mandarin. Curse the colonel's ancestors back to the Ming dynasty. It was a disaster. So now, the colonel is in a rage. And when he is in a rage, we get extra duty. Tough break, Brill said. Tough break, Kong mimicked. You get to drive your truck. See the country. I get to stare at a concrete wall for 12 hours and listen to those pigs breathe. They put them in the sub-level cells. The old ones. No windows. No toilet. Just a hole in the floor. The sub-level? Brill asked, making it sound casual. I thought they only used those for special cases. They are special cases now, Kong said. After today, the colonel wants them buried. The transfer is still for dawn, but until then they're in the hole. Cell block D down the main stairs, past the infirmary and through the steel gate. The one that needs 2 keys. 2 keys? Yeah. Kong grinned, a conspiratorial drunken look. One for the duty officer, and one for the shift sergeant. Sergeant Kim has it tonight. Wears it on a chain around his fat neck. Thinks it makes him important. This was gold. Better than any map. This was the living, breathing detail of the place. So, Sergeant Kim is the man to know, Brill said, raising his bowl. To Sergeant Kim. May his neck get even fatter. Kong laughed and drank. His friend Park looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. He kept glancing at the door. We should go, Kong, Park said. We have early muster. Muster can wait, Kong grumbled, but he was slowing down. The wine was catching up to him. He drained his bowl and pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. You're right. I need to sleep. Otherwise, I might fall asleep on duty and let the Americans escape. He laughed again at his own joke. Brill stood up too. I'm heading back myself. Long day. They walked out together into the cool night air. The accordion had stopped. The village was silent. Park said a quick goodnight and hurried off toward the barracks. That left Brill alone with Kong. Which way are you? Brill asked. Barracks C, Kong said, pointing unsteadily. You. The motor pool billets. This way. Brill gestured down a narrow, unlit alley between 2 houses. It was a shortcut. Ah, good, Kong said. I hate walking the main street. Too many officers. They turned into the alley. It was pitch black, the moonlight blocked by the roofs. The ground was uneven, littered with trash. Kong stumbled. Damn it. He leaned against a wall to steady himself. This wine goes right to your head. It does, Brill said. He was right behind Kong now. You know, Corporal, Kong said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Sometimes I think this whole thing is. He never finished the thought. Brill didn't use his knife. A knife wound would raise questions, require an investigation. This needed to look like an accident. A drunken soldier stumbling in the dark. He stepped forward, his left hand grabbing the front of Kang's collar, his right hand cupped and rigid. He slammed the heel of his hand up and under Kang's nose, driving the cartilage straight up into his brain. There was a soft, wet crunch. Kang's body went rigid for a single, silent second. His eyes, wide with a surprise that never had time to become fear, stared into the darkness. Then he went completely limp. Brill lowered him to the ground, arranging his limbs in the awkward sprawl of a bad fall. He took Kang's wallet and papers, then turned his pockets inside out. A robbery. A local thief, maybe. It muddied the waters. He checked the man's pulse. Nothing. Brill stepped back, melting into the deeper shadows at the end of the alley. He listened. A dog barked somewhere. A door closed. Nothing else. No one had seen. No one had heard. He pulled the small, remote detonator from his pocket. The red light glowed, a single point of promise in the absolute dark. He had the uniform, the papers, the weapon. Now, he had the intelligence. He knew where the seals were. He knew about Sergeant Kim and his key. He started walking, not toward the motor pool, but on a wide circle back toward the compound's eastern perimeter. Back toward the drainage pipe. Chapter 8. The water in the drainage pipe was colder the second time around. It seeped into the stolen uniform, clinging to Brill's skin with a foul, chilling embrace. He moved through the blackness, the dead weight of the Korean rifle on his back, his own suppressed pistol now in his hand. The 2 guards he'd left in the connecting chamber were a problem he couldn't solve, a clock that had started ticking the moment their hearts stopped. Sooner or later, someone would come looking. It had to be done before then. He emerged into the maintenance corridor, a concrete tube humming with the lifeblood of the compound. Steam hissed from a leaky pipe overhead, casting ghostly tendrils in the beam of his small flashlight. He didn't use the light for more than a second at a time, just quick flashes to confirm the route from Park's map, now a memorized image in his mind. Left at the junction, past the main electrical conduit, then up the iron ladder to the service level beneath the administration block. The uniform wasn't a disguise, it was a suggestion. In the dark, from a distance, it suggested he belonged. But Brill knew his height, the set of his shoulders, the way he moved. None of it was right. He was a Westerner, a predator whose camouflage was the apathy of his prey. He banked on the fact that soldiers, especially those on a rear echelon post, see what they expect to see. They expected to see another tired grunt in a shabby uniform. His job was to never give them a reason to look closer. He found the ladder and climbed, the metal rungs cold and slick under his hands. He paused at the top, listening. Footsteps. 2 men, walking at a conversational pace in the corridor above. And he said if the reports weren't on his desk by morning, he'd have me cleaning latrines for a month, one voice said. The quartermaster? Who else? The man has the soul of a tax collector. Brill waited until the footsteps faded. He pushed the maintenance hatch up an inch. It opened into a janitor's closet. The smell of ammonia and damp rags filled his nostrils. Perfect. He slipped out, closing the hatch behind him, and found himself in a long, dimly lit hallway. This was the ground floor of the main building. According to the drunk guard Kong, the stairs to the detention sublevel were at the far end, past the infirmary. The infirmary door was propped open. A medic sat at a small desk, his head bobbing as he fought off sleep. The air smelled of antiseptic. Brill hugged the opposite wall, a shadow passing a shadow, his soft-soled boots making no sound on the linoleum. He passed the door without the medic ever stirring. The stairwell was caged in thick wire mesh, the steps made of concrete. A single bare bulb cast a web of shadows. He started down, his hand on the cool metal railing. The air grew colder, heavier. This was the way down into the earth, where the state sent the people it wanted to forget. He was halfway down when he heard a noise from below. A steel door scraping open. He froze, pressing himself into the angle where the stairs met the wall. 2 guards emerged from the doorway at the bottom of the stairs. They were talking, their voices echoing in the stairwell. Swears he saw a ghost near the west wall. Old man Kim. He sees ghosts after 2 bowls of soup. Tell him to drink less. Still, it gives you a chill. They started up the stairs. Brill held his breath. He was exposed. The single bulb was directly above him. If they looked up, if they paid any attention at all, they would see him. They would see a face that didn't belong, eyes that were the wrong shape, a man who was too tall, too still. The first guard was looking at his feet, taking the steps one at a time like a man weary to his bones. The second was lighting a cigarette, his head down, his world shrunk to the small flame in his cupped hands. They passed within 5 feet of him. Brill could smell the cheap tobacco, the sweat on their uniforms. They didn't look up. They were already thinking about their bunks, about a bowl of noodles, about anything other than the here and now. They reached the top of the stairs, and their footsteps receded down the hall. Brill let out his breath slowly. His heart, which had been hammering against his ribs, settled back into its steady rhythm. He went down the rest of the stairs. The door at the bottom was heavy steel. A small barred window was set into it at eye level. This was the entrance to cell block D. A small utilitarian desk sat to one side, and behind it, a man in a sergeant's uniform sat reading a thin, worn-out book. He was fat, just as Kong had described, with a round, fleshy face and a neck that bulged over his collar. A tarnished silver chain was looped around it. Sergeant Kim. The man with the key. He was alone. It was too good to be true. Brill scanned the area. A camera was mounted high in the corner, its red light glowing. It was an old model, fixed position, aimed squarely at the steel door. It saw the desk, but not the small alcove to the right of the stairs, where a bank of circuit breakers was set into the wall. Brill slipped into the alcove. He was invisible to the camera here. He watched Sergeant Kim. The man turned a page, his lips moving silently as he read. He licked his thumb, a fat wet sound. He shifted his weight on the creaking wooden chair. He seemed settled in for the night. Brill needed to get him away from that desk. Away from the camera's eye. He studied the circuit breaker box. It was old, the labels handwritten in faded ink. Stairwell. Intercom. Cell block C lights. And at the bottom, a larger switch, infirmary main. An idea formed. It was risky. It would cause a stir. But it was better than a gunshot. He reached into his pack and pulled out a roll of electrical tape and a small metal shim from his toolkit. He opened the panel on the circuit breaker box. With delicate precision, he used the shim to pry open the housing on the infirmary breaker, exposing the contacts. He wrapped the shim in electrical tape, leaving just the tip exposed, and carefully wedged it between the two main contacts. It wasn't a dead short. It was an intermittent fault. Something that would flicker, fail, and frustrate. He closed the panel and waited. 5 minutes passed. Sergeant Kim yawned, stretching his thick arms over his head. Then it happened. The light in the stairwell flickered once, twice, and went out, plunging the area into near total darkness. The only light came from the small desk lamp where Sergeant Kim sat. "Aish," Kim muttered, a sound of pure annoyance. He looked up at the darkened stairwell. He looked at the circuit breaker box. He sighed the sigh of a man whose quiet night had just been ruined. He heaved himself out of his chair and lumbered toward the alcove. "Always something," he grumbled to himself. "Pay 1,000 men to build a place, and not one of them knows how to wire a simple light." He was grumbling, not shouting. His hand was on the breaker box, not his pistol. He didn't suspect a thing. He opened the panel, his back to Brill. He squinted at the labels. Brill stepped out of the shadows. Kim must have sensed him, a sudden drop in temperature, the displacement of air. He started to turn, his mouth opening to form a question. The question died in his throat. Brill's left arm snaked around Kim's thick neck, his forearm pressing hard against the man's windpipe. His right hand clamped over Kim's mouth and nose, stifling any sound. Kim's fat body thrashed, his hands clawing at Brill's arm. He was strong, the brute strength of a bull. His boots kicked back, slamming into Brill's shins. But Brill had leverage and technique. He drove his knee into the back of Kim's thigh, buckling his leg, and twisted, pulling the sergeant off balance. They fell into the alcove, out of the camera's view, a tangle of limbs in the dark. Kim's struggles grew weaker. His lungs burned for air they couldn't get. His fat fingers scrabbled at the chain around his neck. Brill held on, his grip like iron, until the last tremor faded and the body went limp beneath him. He held it for another 30 seconds, just to be sure. He let the body slump to the floor. He worked quickly, his fingers finding the chain around the sergeant's neck. The key was heavy, made of old brass. He unhooked it and pocketed it. He needed the second key now, the duty officer's key. He felt the sergeant's pockets. Nothing. He went back to the desk. It would be in the top drawer. Locked. He pulled out his lockpicks. The lock was cheap, standard issue. It took him 4 seconds to open the drawer. The second key was there, lying next to a half-eaten apple and a picture of a woman who was too pretty for Sergeant Kim. Brill took the key. He had them both. He looked at the steel door. He looked at the camera. He walked back to the breaker box and pulled the shim out, tucking it away. He flipped the breaker for the stairwell light. It came back on. Everything looked normal. Except for the dead sergeant, hidden in the shadows. Brill walked to the desk, picked up Kim's book and sat down in his chair, his back to the camera. He pulled the brim of his cap low. From the camera's perspective, it would just look like the sergeant had returned to his reading. He held the 2 keys in his hand. They felt warm. He looked at the steel door leading to cell block D. The first part was done. Now for the second. Chapter 9. Brill sat in the dead man's chair for 15 minutes. It was the longest 15 minutes of his life. He didn't read the book. He listened. He listened to the hum of the single light bulb, the drip of water somewhere deep in the concrete guts of the compound, the sound of his own steady breathing. He was waiting for the rhythm to reassert itself, for the compound to be lulled by the fact that Sergeant Kim was still at his post, a fat, silent lump in a chair. To the camera, he was just a shape, a placeholder. No alarms went off. No one called on the intercom. The 2 guards he'd passed on the stairs didn't come back down. The night was proceeding as scheduled. It was time. He stood up, placed the book face down on the desk, and walked to the steel door. He moved without hurry, a man on a routine check. The first lock was for the duty officer's key. It was a big, chunky tumbler lock, German-made and decades old. The key slid in with a well-oiled click. He turned it. The bolt shot back with a loud thunk that seemed to echo through the entire stairwell. Brill froze, listening. Nothing. The second lock, Sergeant Kim's lock, was lower down. This one was Korean, a cheaper copy of a Soviet design. It fought him. The brass key grated against the pins, and he had to jiggle it, putting just the right amount of pressure on it before the cylinder turned with a reluctant, grinding groan. The sound set his teeth on edge. He pulled the heavy door open a few inches. The air that flowed out was different. Colder. It smelled of damp stone, human waste, and despair. It was the smell of a tomb. He slipped through the opening and pulled the door shut behind him. It didn't latch. He was in. The corridor beyond was narrow, built from rough-hewn rock and concrete. A string of bare, low-wattage bulbs in wire cages provided a sickly yellow light. Water trickled down the rock walls, collecting in slimy puddles on the floor. 10 yards down the corridor, a single guard sat on a stool, leaning against the wall, his rifle across his lap. He was looking down the corridor, away from Brill. He hadn't heard the door. Brill moved forward, his feet silent on the damp concrete. The guard was young, his face smooth in the dim light. He was looking at something in his hands. A photograph, maybe. A letter from home. He was a million miles away. Brill was 5 feet away when the kid sighed, a sad, lonely sound. He folded the letter and tucked it into his breast pocket. He started to look up. He never saw Brill. Brill's hand came up from behind, not grabbing but striking, the rigid edge of his hand hitting the kid's temple with a sharp, percussive pop. The kid's head snapped to the side, his eyes rolling back. He slumped off the stool, unconscious before he hit the floor. Brill caught him, easing his body down. He checked the pulse. It was there, thready but steady. He'd live. Leaving him alive was a risk, but a dead body was a bigger one. He dragged the kid into the darkness under the stairwell and left him there. He continued down the corridor. It ended in a T-junction. To the right, more corridor. To the left, a row of 4 steel doors, each with a small barred slit at eye level. Cell block D. He approached the first door. He peered through the slit. It was pitch black inside, but he could hear breathing. Slow, steady. He slid the heavy bolt back. It was loud, a screech of metal on metal. The breathing inside stopped. Brill opened the door. "Martinez," he whispered into the darkness. A shape moved on the floor. "Who's there?" The voice was a low rasp, but it held the unmistakable edge of command. "A friend," Brill said. "I'm getting you out." "Yeah. You and what army?" The shape rose. It was Chief Petty Officer Martinez. He filled the doorway, a silhouette of bruised muscle and defiance. "Just me," Brill said. "Colonel Park sent me." That was the test. Park was the defector. If Martinez reacted with suspicion, it meant he knew Park had set them up. "Park," Martinez spat the name like something foul. "That son of a bitch." He was turned. He led us right into it. Good. They were on the same page. He's dead, Brill said. He gave me the layout before he died. Figured it was the least he could do. Martinez was silent for a moment, processing this. Who are you? No one you know. Let's go. We're on the clock. My men, Martinez said. It wasn't a question. In the other cells. Let's get them. They moved to the next door. Brill slid the bolt. Inside was Shen. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, his back straight like a meditating monk. His broken arm was cradled in his lap. When the door opened, he looked up, and his eyes were like chips of ice. Chief, Shen said, his voice calm. He looked at Brill. New guy. He's our ride home, Martinez said. Next was Williams, the sniper. He was lying on his side, his face to the wall. His hands, the tools of his trade, were wrapped in bloody rags. Williams, Martinez said softly. Williams rolled over. His face was a mess of cuts and bruises, but his eyes were sharp. They went from Martinez to Brill, assessing, analyzing. About time, he muttered. I was getting bored. The last cell held Jackson, the medic. He was in the worst shape. He was curled in a fetal position in the corner, shivering, though the air wasn't that cold. Doc, Martinez said, kneeling beside him. Hey. We're leaving. Jackson looked up. His eyes were unfocused, glazed with pain. Can't, he whispered. Ribs. I think something's punctured. We'll carry you, Martinez said. Brill watched the interaction. They were a unit. Broken but not beaten. He handed Martinez a small medical kit from his pack. Here. For him. We need to move. Martinez nodded, his hands already working, injecting Jackson with a syringe of morphine. Okay, Ghost, he said, not looking up from his work. Talk to me. What's the plan? Out the way I came in, Brill said. Through the service tunnels and out a drainage pipe on the east perimeter. I have uniforms and weapons stashed. There's a fuel truck in the compound I've rigged with a charge. That's our diversion. Martinez finished with Jackson and looked up at Brill. His one good eye was sharp, analytical. He was a professional. The extraction? The coast. 72 hours from my insertion. That gives us about 40 left. Not good enough, Martinez said. They're moving us to Pyongyang at dawn. We won't last a day there. Whatever we're doing, we do it tonight. That was my thinking, Brill said. This mission was compromised from the jump, Martinez said, his voice low and hard. He stood up, helping Shen get Jackson to his feet. Our intel was perfect. Too perfect. The route, the pickup point, parks bona fides. It was all fed to us. We walked in, and they were waiting. 50 of them, maybe more. Dug in. Machine guns. Mortars. It wasn't an ambush, it was a kill box. Who fed it to you? Brill asked. That's the million-dollar question. The signal came through the rock servers in Seoul. Clean as a whistle. It had all the right authentications. Someone on our side, or someone with access to our side, sold us out. A third guard. The outline had mentioned 3. Brill had only dealt with 2. The one he'd left unconscious, and the one who'd been reading the letter. Where was the third? His head snapped up. He listened. There it was. Faint, but getting closer. Footsteps. Heavy, rhythmic. Coming down the corridor from the T-junction. A patrol. Company, Brill hissed. Chapter 10. The footsteps were methodical. Unhurried. The sound of a man on a routine patrol, confident in the silence of his concrete world. Back in the cells, Brill hissed, his voice ablaze in the quiet. All of you. Move. There was no hesitation. Martinez shoved Williams toward his cell, and Shen, grabbing the injured Jackson, half pushed, half carried him back into the last one. The morphine had kicked in, and Jackson moved with a loose-limbed stumble, his head lolling. Brill slid the heavy bolt on Jackson's door, the screech of the metal unnaturally loud. He moved to the next, then the next, ramming the bolts home. It was a desperate, noisy gamble. Martinez was the last one. He stood in his doorway, watching Brill. "What's your play?" "I'm the guard who just locked you up," Brill said, his eyes fixed on the corridor. "Get in." Martinez gave a single, sharp nod and stepped back into the darkness. Brill shot the bolt on his door and flattened himself against the wall next to it, the cold stone a shock through the thin fabric of the stolen uniform. He held the Korean rifle, his thumb on the fire selector. The footsteps reached the T-junction. A guard, a corporal by his insignia, stopped and peered down the corridor toward the cells. He was a thick-set man with a bored expression. He looked at the 4 locked doors, then turned and started walking back the way he came. Brill let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. But the guard stopped again. He looked back, a slight frown on his face. Something was wrong. The silence, maybe. Or the sound of the bolts, still echoing in his memory. He unslung his rifle. "Sergeant Kim," he called out, his voice tentative. "Everything all right?" There was no answer from the stairwell. The corporal's posture changed. He wasn't bored anymore. He walked back to the junction and called out again, louder this time. "Sergeant." "Report." Silence. The corporal unsnapped the flap on his radio pouch. Before he could key the mic, another voice came from the stairwell. "What is it?" A second guard appeared. Younger than the first, with the nervous energy of a man who hadn't been on the job long. "The sergeant isn't answering," the corporal said. "And I heard something." "The cell bolts." "He's probably asleep," the younger one said. "He's always asleep." "The door is unbolted," the corporal said, pointing toward the main entrance to the block. "From this side." They walked together toward the stairwell, their boots crunching on the gritty floor. Brill could hear their low, murmuring voices. They reached the steel door. One of them pushed it open. Brill heard a sharp intake of breath. "God's above, he's at the desk." Then a different sound. A chair scraping. A moment of silence. Then a choked cry. "He's dead." His neck. The world erupted. It wasn't a siren. It was a klaxon, a deep gut-wrenching whoop 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 that vibrated through the concrete and into Brill's bones. Red lights kicked on, strobing, turning the yellow-lit corridor into a pulsating artery of hell. Shouts echoed from the stairwell. The alarm was general. The entire compound was coming alive. Brill didn't wait. He threw the bolt on Martinez's cell. "Go." He moved down the line, sliding bolts, the screech of metal lost in the din of the klaxon. The SEALs came out, blinking in the strobing red light, their faces grim masks. "Weapons!" Martinez yelled over the noise. "None here," Brill shouted back. "We have to get to the stash." "No time. The stairs will be crawling." Martinez was right. Heavy boots were already pounding down the concrete steps. Brill saw the first set of legs appear through the wire mesh of the stairwell cage. "Cover!" Brill yelled, shoving Shen and Jackson toward the junction. He and Martinez took positions on opposite sides of the corridor, using the corner as cover. The first 2 guards hit the bottom of the stairs and charged out, rifles up, their faces tight with adrenaline. They expected to find a prisoner. They found Brill and Martinez. Brill's stolen rifle coughed out a 3-round burst. The rounds hit the lead guard high in the chest, throwing him backward into the wire mesh. He slid to the floor, leaving a wet, dark smear. Martinez, unarmed, did something unexpected. As the second guard swung his rifle toward Brill, Martinez lunged from the shadows, grabbing the hot barrel of the Alaska 47 with his bare hands. The guard yelped in pain and surprise. Martinez ignored the smell of his own burning flesh, using the rifle as a lever to twist the guard off balance and slam his head into the concrete wall. The man went down in a heap. Martinez ripped the rifle from his hands. "I'll take that," he grunted, checking the magazine. 2 more guards appeared at the top of the stairs, firing blindly down into the corridor. Bullets sparked off the rock walls, whining through the air. Williams, the sniper, grabbed the rifle from the first dead guard. I got right, he yelled, taking a position next to Martinez. Doc, stay down, Shen shouted, shielding the injured Jackson with his own body. We can't hold this, Brill yelled. The way out was blocked. More men were coming. The other way. The corridor, to the right. What's down there? Martinez shouted back, laying down a burst of covering fire toward the stairs. I don't know, Brill admitted. Park's map ended here. But it's the only way we can go. Then we go. Brill fired a final burst, forcing the guards on the stairs to duck back. Move. Now. He fell back to the T-junction. Williams and Martinez followed, firing as they retreated, leapfrogging past each other. The North Koreans were screaming now, a chaotic mix of orders and curses. They rounded the corner, into the unknown corridor. It was identical to the first, narrow, damp, lit by the same caged bulbs, now flashing red. It stretched ahead, into the darkness. There was a heavy steel door, 100 yards down. Toward the door, Brill commanded. They ran. Shen and Martinez half-dragged, half-carried Jackson, whose breath was coming in ragged, painful gasps. The klaxon was relentless, a hammer pounding at their skulls. Behind them, the North Koreans swarmed into the corridor, their flashlights cutting beams through the strobing red light. A volley of shots rang out, chipping concrete from the walls around them. Williams, a natural sniper even with a beat-up rifle and mangled hands, stopped, dropped to one knee, and fired 3 single, well-aimed shots back down the hall. One of the lead guards screamed and went down, clutching his leg. The others scattered for cover. Nice shooting, Martinez grunted. Could do it with my eyes closed, Williams said, a flash of his old self. If my hands worked. They reached the steel door. It was a dead end. There was no handle, no lock that Brill could see. Just a solid plate of riveted steel. No way through, Shen yelled, his back pressed against the door. There has to be, Brill said, running his hands over the cold metal. He found it. A small, recessed panel near the floor. An electronic lock. It's a maglock, he said. We need power. And a keycard. They didn't have either. The guards were advancing again, firing systematically as they moved up the corridor. They were trapped. Martinez looked at Brill, his one good eye lit by the flashing red lights. Okay, Ghost. What's plan B? Brill looked back down the corridor, at the advancing soldiers. Then he looked at the steel door. Then at Shen, the demolitions expert. Shen, he said. How do you feel about improvising? Chapter 11. Shen looked from the steel door to Brill, his face a calm mask in the strobing red hell of the corridor. The klaxon was a physical presence, a fist pounding on the inside of his skull. Bullets from the advancing guards ricocheted off the rock walls, filling the air with stone dust and the smell of cordite. Improvising. Shen yelled over the din. What do you have in your pack, Ghost? A pound of C4, Brill shouted back. That'll bring the whole mountain down on our heads, Shen said. I need something focused. A shape charge. You got a blasting cap? No. The charge on the fuel truck has a radio detonator. That's it. Useless, Shen spat. He ran his good hand over the maglock panel on the door, his touch surprisingly gentle. Okay. Okay. I need a battery. A 9-volt, if you have it. Wire. And something to contain a charge. A pipe, a can, anything. Check the dead guards, Martinez barked at Williams, who was methodically firing single shots down the hall, making the North Koreans pay for every foot of ground they took. Look for a radio. Williams didn't answer, but a moment later he crawled back from the corner, dragging a satchel from one of the guards he'd shot. He dumped the contents on the floor. A half-eaten rice ball, a pack of cigarettes, and a bulky Soviet-era radio. Shen fell on it like a starving man on a loaf of bread. He ripped the back panel off with his good hand, his teeth helping to pry the plastic loose. He pulled out the battery pack. It's a 12-volt. Heavy. But it'll work. He started stripping wires with his teeth. They're advancing, Martinez yelled, squeezing off a burst from his rifle. They're getting braver. He was right. The Koreans were using fire and maneuver tactics now. 2 men laying down suppressing fire while a third ran forward to the next bit of cover. They were disciplined. I need powder, Shen said, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was oblivious to the bullets snapping past him. Williams, Martinez. Your magazines. Martinez didn't hesitate. He slammed the release on his Alaska 47 and tossed the magazine to Shen. Williams did the same. Last one, the sniper grunted. Make it count. Shen took a rock and, using it as a hammer, began prying the bullets from the casings with the blade of a knife he'd produced from his boot. He poured the fine gray powder from each cartridge into a small pile on the floor. It was painstaking work, made harder by his broken arm, which he kept tucked tight against his body. This isn't enough, he said, looking at the small mound of propellant. It'll barely dent the paint. Brill looked around, his mind racing. The corridor was bare rock and concrete. There was nothing. Then his eyes fell on the caged light bulbs overhead. An idea, desperate and stupid, clicked into place. The lights, he said. What's in the breaker box? What? Martinez yelled, ducking as a volley of shots stitched a line across the wall above his head. The breaker box back by the stairs. Is it just switches, or are there fuses? Fuses, Shen said without looking up. Old compound like this. Has to be cartridge fuses. What kind? Big ones. Full of zinc powder. Shen's head snapped up, his eyes locking with Brill's. A slow smile spread across his face. Oh, you beautiful bastard. Stay here, Brill said. Cover me. Are you insane? Martinez yelled. That's 100 yards of hell. Got a better idea? Martinez just shook his head and slammed a new magazine, his last, into his rifle. Go, he said. Williams and I will make them keep their heads down. Brill took a deep breath and sprinted. He ran low, his body a blur in the strobing red light. He was a target in a shooting gallery. He could feel the concussion of rounds passing his head, hear the angry buzz of hornets looking for a place to sting. He didn't look back. He just ran. He slid the last 10 feet on the slick floor, crashing into the T-junction. He scrambled toward the stairwell, toward the dead guards, and ripped open the door to the fuse box he'd seen earlier. It was just as Shen had predicted. A row of thick ceramic cartridge fuses, each the size of a small sausage. He pulled 2 of them from their clips, his heart hammering. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs. An officer, judging by his uniform. He had a pistol in his hand. He saw Brill and his eyes went wide. He raised his pistol. Brill didn't have time to aim his rifle. He threw one of the heavy fuses like a baseball. It was a wild, desperate act, but it worked. The fuse caught the officer squarely in the face with a dull thud. The man staggered back, clutching his nose, his pistol firing once into the ceiling. Brill didn't wait for a second invitation. He turned and ran back down the corridor, the second fuse clutched in his hand. He slid to a stop beside Shen, gasping for air. Merry Christmas. He tossed the fuse to the demo man. Shen caught it. Now we're cooking. He cracked the ceramic casing and poured the fine silvery zinc powder into his growing pile, mixing it with the gunpowder. This will burn hot, he said. Hot enough to melt the lock's electronics, maybe even weaken the steel. A bullet ricocheted off the floor and slammed into Shen's leg. He cried out a sharp, ragged sound and collapsed, his face twisted in pain. Shen, Martinez yelled. I'm all right, Shen gritted out, his face pale. He was already tying a strip of cloth from his shirt around the wound. It was a through and through, but it was bleeding badly. Just keep their heads down. I'm almost done. He worked with a feverish intensity now, his hands moving with a surgeon's precision despite the pain. He packed the powder mixture into the empty casing of the radio battery. He attached the wires from the battery to the filament he'd carefully extracted from one of the light bulbs. It was a crude but effective detonator, a shaped charge the size of a man's fist. Get back, he ordered, crawling toward the door. He pressed the device directly over the maglock panel. The blast will be focused, but the shrapnel won't be. Get behind the corner. Brill and Martinez grabbed the injured Jackson and pulled him back toward the junction. Williams provided a final volley of covering fire before scrambling back himself. Shen stayed by the door, his rifle in his good hand. He looked at them, his face slick with sweat. "This is going to be loud," he said, a grim smile on his face. He laid his rifle on the floor, took the 2 bare wires in his hand, and looked back down the corridor at the advancing guards. "Hey," he screamed in perfect Korean. "Come and get it, you sons of bitches." He touched the wires together. The world turned white. The sound wasn't a bang. It was a physical blow, a concussion that ripped the air from their lungs and slammed them against the wall. A jet of white-hot fire shot out from the door, followed by a shower of molten metal. The klaxon died with a final choked gasp. The red emergency lights shattered. The corridor was plunged into absolute ringing darkness. Brill pushed himself up, his ears screaming. He couldn't see anything. "Status?" Martinez croaked from somewhere in the dark. "Williams here." "Jackson." "I'm here." There was no answer from Shen. Brill crawled forward, toward the spot where the door had been. His hands touched something warm and sticky. He found a flashlight on one of the dead guards, its lens cracked but still working. He switched it on. The steel door was gone. In its place was a jagged, glowing hole, the edges of the metal peeled back like a sardine can. And lying on the floor, just inside the opening, was Shen. He was on his back, his uniform peppered with shrapnel, but he was alive. And he was grinning. "Did it work?" he whispered. Chapter 12. Brill's ears screamed in the sudden, ringing silence. The darkness was absolute, thick and suffocating. The air tasted of ozone and burnt metal. "It worked," Martinez said from somewhere in the blackness, his voice a raw croak. He knelt beside Shen, his hands moving with practiced efficiency in the beam of Brill's recovered flashlight. "He's got shrapnel in his side, but the vest took most of it. He'll live if we get him out of here." "Get him up," Brill said. The flashlight beam cut a nervous path through the dust-choked air. "They'll be on us before the dust settles." The hole where the door had been was a jagged maw, its edges glowing a dull cherry red. Beyond it lay a rough-hewn tunnel, nothing like the concrete corridor they were in. This was an old service passage, forgotten and unfinished, the rock walls raw and dripping. Williams, his face a grimace of pain from his battered hands, helped Martinez lift Shen. The demo man was conscious, but his face was the color of ash. Jackson, still foggy from the morphine, was being supported by his own 2 feet, but just barely. "Through the hole," Brill ordered. "Now." They scrambled through the opening, into the new tunnel. It was narrower, the ceiling lower. The floor was uneven, littered with debris from its original excavation. This place wasn't on any official map. It was a scar left by the builders, a secret artery running through the mountain. "Where does this go?" Martinez asked, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Park's intel said there was a maintenance tunnel that led to the motor pool," Brill said, his flashlight beam probing the darkness ahead. "This has to be it." "He also said the SEALs were coming to get him," Martinez shot back. "His intel has a 50-50 track record so far. It's the only 50 we've got." They moved deeper into the tunnel. It was slow going. Every step was a gamble on the uneven ground. Martinez and Williams practically carried Shen and Jackson between them, a 4-legged wounded animal shuffling through the dark. Behind them, they could hear the first tentative shouts from the corridor they'd left. The North Koreans were regrouping. They'd be coming through the hole in minutes. "They're boxing us in," Williams said, his voice tight. "We're trading one coffin for another." "Not yet," Brill said. He stopped and pulled the small radio detonator from his pocket. The tiny red light on it seemed impossibly bright in the darkness. Martinez saw it. "What's that?" "The main event," Brill said. "Time to change the subject." "The fuel truck," Martinez said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're going to do it now?" "They think the fight is down here," Brill said, his thumb resting on the button. "They're containing the problem. I'm about to give them a much bigger problem, up where everyone can see it. It'll bring the whole compound down on the motor pool. Right where we're headed. No, Brill said. It'll bring the whole compound down on the fire. Men are like water. They follow the path of least resistance. A few guys in a tunnel is a problem for a squad. A fuel depot going up is a problem for the base commander. Guess which one he's going to throw his men at? He didn't wait for an answer. He pressed the button. There was no sound. Not at first. For a second, Brill thought it had failed. Then he felt it. A low, deep-throated thump that wasn't heard but felt, a vibration that traveled through miles of solid rock to punch them in the chest. It was the sound of a giant's heart stopping. The shouts from the corridor behind them changed. The tone shifted from aggressive confidence to confused alarm. A new siren started up, this one from outside, a frantic wailing shriek that spoke of surface-level panic. What was that? They heard a Korean soldier yell from the other side of the hole. An explosion. Outside. The fuel depot. By the west gate. An officer's voice cut through the chatter, screaming orders. The footsteps, which had been advancing on the hole, stopped. Then they started to retreat, a scramble of boots heading back toward the stairwell. Brill allowed himself a thin smile in the dark. Path of least resistance, he said. He turned and pushed deeper into the tunnel. Let's move. He just bought us 5 minutes. The tunnel twisted and turned, sloping gradually upward. The air grew fresher, losing the scent of blasted metal and gaining the smell of diesel and oil. They were getting close. Shen, despite the pain, was giving directions. The floor, it's getting smoother. Poured concrete. We're under the motor pool garage. Look, Williams said, pointing the beam of his flashlight upward. A square shape was set into the ceiling. A manhole cover. That's it, Brill said. Give me a boost. Martinez and Williams locked their hands together, their bruised and burned fingers lacing into a solid platform. Brill stepped up, pushing against the heavy iron cover. It didn't budge. It's bolted from the top, he grunted, his muscles straining. Let me, Shen whispered. He pulled a thin, flexible wire from a hidden pocket in his boot. The lock on these service covers is a simple pin and tumbler. Designed to keep kids out, not to stop a professional. Brill dropped back down, and Martinez helped hold the injured Shen up toward the ceiling. Even in his wounded state, Shen's hands were steady. He threaded the wire into the keyhole, his head cocked, listening, feeling. There was a series of soft clicks, almost inaudible. Got it, he breathed, and slumped back into Martinez's arms, his energy spent. Brill climbed up again. This time, when he pushed, the cover shifted with a low groan. He moved it aside an inch and peered through the crack. Chaos. The motor pool was bathed in the flickering orange glow of a massive fire raging on the west side of the compound. Searchlights crisscrossed the sky wildly. Soldiers were running everywhere, most of them heading toward the blaze, their figures silhouetted against the flames. Trucks were starting up, their engines roaring to life as drivers were rousted to move vehicles away from the fire. No one was looking down. No one was paying attention to a manhole cover in the corner of the greasy garage floor. It was the perfect cover. Brill slid the heavy lid aside and pulled himself out, the garage air thick with the smell of burning fuel. He scanned the area. A row of trucks was parked against the far wall. One of them, a ZIL 131 transport, was sitting by itself, its canvas cover flapping in the wind. Its engine was idling. The driver must have started it, and then run off to join the excitement. He looked back down into the hole. 4 faces, pale and grim, stared up at him from the darkness. The party started, Brill said. Let's not be late. Chapter 13. Getting the seals out of the hole was like pulling teeth from a corpse. It was ugly, clumsy work. Brill and Martinez formed a human chain, hauling the dead weight of the 2 injured men up into the chaotic, flame-lit garage. Shen came out under his own power, but just barely, his face a waxy, sweat-slicked mask of pain. Jackson was mostly dead weight, his eyes half closed, lost in a morphine dream. The truck, Brill yelled over the roar of the fire and the distant shriek of sirens. The ZIL, with the engine running. Go. Martinez didn't ask questions. He slung Jackson's arm over his shoulder and half-dragged him across the greasy concrete floor. Williams followed, cradling his rifle, his mangled hands making the simple act look like a form of torture. Brill grabbed Shen. Can you make it? Just point me, Shen gritted out, leaning on Brill. They moved through a maelstrom of organized chaos. Soldiers ran past them, their faces illuminated by the orange glow, their eyes fixed on the massive column of black smoke and fire rising from the west end of the compound. No one gave them a second look. They were just more bodies moving through the confusion. They reached the truck, a drab green ZIL 131, its engine chugging out a rhythmic cloud of diesel smoke. It smelled of rust and hard mileage. In the back, Brill ordered, pushing Shen toward the canvas cover. All of you except Martinez. Stay down and stay quiet until the shooting starts. Williams helped heave Jackson over the tailgate like a sack of grain, then scrambled in after him. Shen, with a final surge of adrenaline, pulled himself in. Brill turned to Martinez. You're with me. He slid behind the wheel. The cab was cramped and smelled of stale cigarettes and unwashed socks. The seat was cracked vinyl, the dashboard a simple array of big, clunky Soviet-era gauges. He slammed the gearshift into first. It felt like stirring a bucket of rocks with a stick. Martinez climbed into the passenger seat, the rifle he'd taken from the dead guard across his lap. He looked at Brill, his one good eye taking in the scene. You know how to drive this thing? We're about to find out, Brill said. He let out the clutch. The truck lurched forward with a groan of tortured metal. He didn't floor it. Not yet. He pulled out from the parking spot and fell in line behind another truck that was heading toward the main gate. He drove with one hand, his other resting on the gearshift, keeping his speed slow, his movements deliberate. He was just another driver, following orders, moving a vehicle away from the fire. Where's the main gate from here? Brill asked, his eyes scanning everything, the guard towers, the rooftops, the running men. Straight ahead, Martinez said. Past the administration building. They'll have a checkpoint set up. 2 guards, maybe a sergeant. They'll be looking at the fire, Brill said. Don't count on it, Martinez grunted. The gate guards are the only ones who aren't allowed to run to the fire. Their job is to stand there and look bored. They notice things. He was right. As they approached the main gate, Brill could see the checkpoint. The crossing arm was down. 2 guards stood beside it, their rifles held loosely, but their heads were on a swivel. A sergeant with a clipboard stood in the middle of the road. He was waving the truck in front of them through, but his eyes darted everywhere. He was looking for something out of place. And they were something out of place. The sergeant held up his hand, signaling Brill to stop. Brill eased the truck to a halt 20 yards from the gate. The sergeant walked toward them, his boots crunching on the gravel. He had a pencil-thin mustache and the self-important air of a man with a very small amount of authority. Where are you going? The sergeant shouted, his voice thin against the background noise. Brill leaned out the window. Orders from the motor pool. Moving vehicles to the north perimeter, he yelled back in Korean, keeping his voice rough and low. The sergeant squinted, walking closer. He was trying to see their faces in the dim light of the cab. I don't have any orders about that. Who are you? I don't recognize you. He was 5 feet from the driver's side door. Martinez looked at Brill. He made us. Brill didn't answer. His foot slid from the clutch to the accelerator. The sergeant saw the shift. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened to shout a warning. Brill stomped on the accelerator. The ZIL's engine screamed, a raw mechanical howl of fury. The truck leapt forward. The sergeant had just enough time to dive out of the way, rolling in the dirt as the massive tires roared past where he'd been standing. The 2 guards at the gate were caught completely flat-footed. They stared frozen as the 10-ton truck bore down on them. Hold on, Brill said calmly. He aimed for the center of the wooden crossing arm. The truck hit it at 40 miles an hour. The arm didn't just break. It exploded into a shower of white splinters. The truck barely shuddered. They crashed through the gate and out onto the main road, the tires squealing on the pavement. For a moment, there was silence. The stunned silence of audacity. Then the compound erupted behind them. The machine guns in the two guard towers opened up simultaneously, their heavy rounds hammering the back of the truck. Canvas ripped. Metal screamed as bullets punched through the tailgate. "Light him up," Martinez yelled, leaning out his window and firing a long burst back at the nearest tower. The muzzle flash lit up his face, a mask of grim satisfaction. In the back, Williams started firing, his shots more measured. He was aiming for the tower searchlights. One of the lights sparked and went dark. The second one shattered a moment later, plunging the gate into semi-darkness. "Nice shooting, Willie," Martinez yelled. "Tell my hands that," came the tight reply from the back. Brill wrestled with the wheel, the old truck fishtailing on the dirt road. He saw headlights in his rearview mirror. Two of them. Low to the ground. Motorcycles. They were fast, weaving through the darkness, their engines a high-pitched whine. "We got company," Brill shouted. A motorcycle pulled up alongside the passenger side. The driver was steering with one hand, firing a pistol with the other. Bullets pinged off the truck's door. Martinez leaned out and emptied the rest of his magazine at the driver. The man jerked, his motorcycle wobbling violently before crashing into a ditch in a tangle of limbs and metal. "One down," Martinez grunted, fumbling for a fresh magazine. The second motorcycle came up on Brill's side. This one had a passenger in a sidecar, and he had an automatic rifle. A stream of tracers stitched a line across the windshield, which spider-webbed but didn't break. Brill swerved hard to the left. The truck's heavy steel fender caught the sidecar with a screech of tortured metal. The motorcycle was thrown sideways, tumbling end over end before bursting into flames. Then they heard it. A sound that cut through the engine noise and the gunfire. The rhythmic whump 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 of rotor blades. A helicopter, a Soviet-made Hind, rose from behind the compound, its searchlight cutting a brilliant white cone through the night. It swept across the landscape, hunting for them. "Ah hell," Martinez said, his voice flat. The searchlight found them, pinning the truck in its glare, turning the cab into a brightly lit stage. "They're not messing around," Williams yelled from the back. The Hind swooped in low, flying parallel to them. The side door was open, and Brill could clearly see the silhouette of a door gunner behind a heavy machine gun. "Get down," Brill yelled. The Hind's gun opened up, a terrifyingly fast roar. A line of fiery tracers walked across the road just in front of them, kicking up dirt and rocks that peppered the windshield. Brill slammed on the brakes, throwing everyone forward as the truck skidded sideways in the dirt, the helicopter overshooting them. He stomped on the gas again, turning off the main road and onto a narrow track that led into the dark forested hills. "He's coming around," Martinez shouted. The Hind banked sharply, its searchlight once again locking onto them. The door gunner had a clear shot now. The first heavy rounds hammered into the truck's engine block. Steam and smoke poured from under the hood. The engine sputtered, coughed, but kept running. Brill fought the wheel, the truck bucking and groaning as he pushed it deeper into the woods, the helicopter right on their tail, its machine gun chewing up the earth around them. Chapter 14. The Zill screamed. It was the sound of metal tearing itself apart from the inside out. Heavy rounds from the Hind's machine gun had shredded the radiator and punched holes in the engine block. Steam and black oily smoke billowed from under the hood, obscuring Brill's view. He was driving blind, wrestling the wheel as the truck bucked and slewed through the dense pine forest. "She's dying," Martinez yelled, holding onto the dashboard as his head slammed against the roof. "So's the helicopter if he stays this low," Brill shouted back. He wrenched the wheel to the right, aiming for a thick stand of ancient pines. Branches as thick as a man's arm scraped and clawed at the truck's cab, the sound like fingernails on a coffin lid. The Hind's searchlight beam was fractured by the canopy, turning the forest into a disorienting strobe-lit nightmare. The door gunner kept firing, but his bursts were shorter now, more hesitant. He couldn't get a clear line of sight. He was firing at a ghost in the trees. "He's trying to hurt us," Brill grunted, fighting the truck's death throes. The steering was gone. He was just pointing the truck and praying. He wants to push us back toward the road, into a blocking position. Then we should do the opposite, Martinez said. Way ahead of you. Brill saw it 100 yards ahead. A ravine. A deep, rocky cut in the earth, maybe 30 feet across. Too wide to jump. But the near side was a steep, crumbling slope. Get ready to bail. Brill yelled. He aimed the dying truck straight for the edge of the ravine. The engine gave a final, shuddering cough and seized. The truck went silent, except for the screech of protesting metal and the roar of the hind right above them. They were a free-rolling, 10-ton metal coffin. Now, Brill shouted. He kicked his door open and threw himself out, rolling as he hit the pine needle-covered ground. He came up on one knee, his rifle already at his shoulder. Martinez had done the same on his side. The Zill, driverless, hit the edge of the ravine. It teetered for a moment, a perfect silhouetted target against the night sky, and then plunged nose first into the darkness, crashing onto the rocks below with a final, definitive boom of shattered steel. The hind pilot, caught by surprise, banked hard to avoid following it down. For a second, the helicopter's broad, unprotected belly was exposed. Williams, already out of the back of the truck, didn't waste the opportunity. Lying on his stomach, the rifle propped on a fallen log, he fired. A single shot. The sound was almost lost in the echo of the crash. The shot was perfect. It hit the hind's tail rotor gearbox. There was a high-pitched scream of tortured metal, and the helicopter began to spin, its tail whipping back and forth like a wounded snake. The pilot fought for control, the main rotor blades chopping violently at the air. He was trying to gain altitude to get clear. The helicopter, spinning and lurching, disappeared over the treetops. They could still hear it, the sound of its engine ragged and failing, getting farther and farther away. It wasn't going to crash, not yet. But it was out of the fight. It was limping home. Silence descended on the forest, broken only by the crackle of the distant fire at the compound and the ragged breathing of the 5 men. Status, Martinez said, his voice the first to break the quiet. Williams here. I think I can still feel my trigger finger. That's a good sign. Shen, came a weak voice from near the ravine's edge. I didn't much care for the landing. Brill and Martinez found him lying next to Jackson. The medic was still out of it, but Shen was conscious, his face tight with pain. Anything re-broken? Martinez asked. Don't think so, Shen said. But I wouldn't recommend that maneuver for basic training. We have to move, Brill said, scanning the woods. That pilot knows where we are. He knows we're on foot. They'll have teams sweeping this whole forest by sunrise. Which way? Martinez asked, looking at Brill. There was no challenge in the question. It was a professional inquiry. Brill had gotten them this far. He was the guide now. North, Brill said. Toward the coast. But we stay off the roads. We stick to the high ground. They got the wounded to their feet. It was worse now. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of their injuries was setting in. Shen could barely put weight on his wounded leg. Jackson was a dead weight, his head lolling, mumbling something about a hospital in San Diego. We're not going to make good time, Williams said, stating the obvious. He had slung his rifle, unable to carry it for long with his ruined hands. We'll move as fast as the slowest man, Martinez said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He hoisted Jackson's arm over his shoulder. We don't leave anyone behind. Brill nodded. He'd expected it. It was their code. It was also a liability that could get them all killed. They moved out, a ragged line of ghosts melting into the woods. Brill took point, his senses on high alert, reading the terrain, listening for the slightest unnatural sound. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves could be a patrol. They walked for 2 hours, a brutal stumbling march through the darkness. The forest was thick, the ground uneven. Every step was an effort. The wounded men slowed them to a crawl. They had to stop every 20 minutes to let Shen and Jackson rest. During one of the stops, Martinez checked his dwindling supply of morphine. I've got 1 syringe left, he said quietly to Brill, out of earshot of the others. After that, Doc is going to be in a world of hurt. And Shen's not far behind him. We get them to the extraction point, Brill said. The Navy has medics. The extraction point is a lifetime away at this pace, Martinez said, his voice grim. They're closing a net around this province, Brill. Roadblocks. Patrols. They'll have dogs out here by morning. We can't outrun them like this. Then we have to make them lose the trail, Brill said. He pushed them on. Another hour passed. The terrain began to slope downward. Through the trees, Brill could hear a new sound. The sound of running water. He moved ahead, scouting. He came to the bank of a river. It wasn't wide, maybe 40 yards across, but it was fast and deep, the black water churning over hidden rocks. On the far side, the forest continued, rising into another set of dark, unforgiving hills. This was their chance. He went back for the others. There's a river, he told them. We cross here. The water will hide our scent from the dogs. They looked at him like he was insane. Cross that, Williams said, staring at the churning water. In the dark. With 2 men who can barely stand. It's that or we wait for them to find us, Brill said flatly. He's right, Martinez said, his jaw set. We cross. Getting down the steep, muddy bank was a controlled fall. They reached the water's edge, the cold spray misting their faces. The river was a black, angry beast. We'll make a rope, Martinez said. Link our belts together. No time, Brill said. And it'll just get tangled in the current. We go in a chain. I'll go first and find a path. Martinez, you come behind me. Williams, you're in the middle with Jackson. Shen, you're last. Everyone holds on to the man in front. He didn't wait for them to agree. He took the rifle from Williams. Hold this across your chest. It'll help you float if you go under. He stepped into the river. The cold was a physical blow. It stole his breath and drove needles into his skin. The current was a powerful, living thing, trying to rip his feet out from under him. The bottom was a treacherous mix of slick, round stones and sharp rocks. He took another step, then another, probing with his foot before putting his weight down. The water was at his waist, then his chest. He turned back. Okay. Come on. Martinez entered the water, his face a mask of grim determination. He held onto the back of Brill's belt. Williams came next, holding Jackson, whose head was barely above the water. Shen followed, his teeth chattering, his face pale as bone in the faint starlight. They moved out into the center of the river, a fragile human chain fighting against the immense, indifferent power of the current. Chapter 15. Colonel Kim stood on the edge of the ravine and looked down at the mangled carcass of the ZIL-131. He didn't need to get closer to know the men who had stolen it weren't inside. The fire at the compound had been a diversion. The escape, a feint. The crash, a final contemptuous gesture. He breathed in the cool night air, tinged with the scent of pine and burnt fuel. It was a professional's work. Clean. Efficient. Insulting. Kim was a small, neat man. His uniform was perfectly tailored, his boots polished to a mirror shine despite the mud. He looked more like a professor than a soldier, but his eyes, dark and still, held a chilling intelligence. He was the commander of the 8th Special Operations Battalion, the men they called the Night Tigers. They were not the conscripts who guarded the compound. They were hunters. The helicopter pilot reports 5 men on foot, heading north, his lieutenant said, his voice a low hum of respect. He engaged but was damaged by ground fire. Damaged by a single, well-placed shot from a standard rifle in the dark, Kim corrected him softly, his eyes still on the wreckage. This is not a group of panicked prisoners. This is an enemy combat team with a leader. 2 of his men, handlers, brought the dogs forward. They were not the German shepherds used for patrols. They were massive Caucasian shepherds, bred for tracking bears in the mountains, their thick coats bristling, low growls rumbling in their chests. They strained at their leashes, their black noses sampling the air. They abandoned the truck here, Kim said, his gaze sweeping the forest floor. They went into the woods. But they are wounded. The pilot confirmed it. They will be slow. He turned to his lieutenant. Deploy the thermal imagers. I want 2 teams sweeping in a pincer formation, a kilometer apart. We will drive them toward the river. He knelt and picked up a spent rifle casing from where Williams had fired at the helicopter. He rolled the brass between his thumb and forefinger. They are professionals, he murmured, more to himself than to his men. So we will be professional too. Brill felt them before he saw them. A change in the pressure of the night. A new tension in the woods. They had made it across the river and were a mile into the hills on the other side, huddled in a thicket of rhododendron, trying to get warm by sheer proximity. It wasn't working. The cold was deep in their bones. They're coming, Brill said, his voice a low whisper. You see them? Martinez asked. He was trying to rewrap the dressing on Shen's leg, his fingers stiff and clumsy with cold. No. But they're here. Brill was watching the ridgeline behind them. He'd seen a flicker of movement, something that didn't belong. Not an animal. Something methodical. They have dogs. The river bought us some time, but they'll have picked up our trail where we came out of the water. How long do we have? Williams asked. His teeth were chattering. Not long enough, Brill said. We need to split their focus. Make them slow down. Make them afraid of the dark. He looked at the men. They were at their limit. Jackson was shivering violently, the last of the morphine having worn off. Shen was trying to stay conscious, but his head kept drooping. Martinez and Williams were running on pure grit. Martinez, take them and keep moving north, Brill said. Find a place to hole up a half-mile from here. Somewhere high with good cover. What are you going to do? I'm going to introduce myself, Brill said. He began to strip off his wet gear, pulling essentials from his pack. His knife. A length of tripwire. The last of his C4, a small half-pound block he hadn't used on the truck. You're going alone. Martinez's voice was sharp with protest. 1 man makes less noise than 5, Brill said. And I don't have to worry about anyone but myself. Just go. I'll catch up. Martinez hesitated, his loyalty at war with his tactical sense. He knew Brill was right. Don't get yourself killed, Ghost. That's not on the schedule, Brill said. He watched them disappear into the trees, a limping, shuffling group of shadows. Then he turned and began to work. He didn't go far. He backtracked 100 yards, to a narrow game trail that wound through a patch of dense undergrowth. It was the logical path for anyone following them. He found a young, supple sapling growing next to the trail, and bent it back, creating a powerful spring. He used a simple figure-4 deadfall trigger, something he could make with his knife in 2 minutes. He didn't attach it to a log. He attached it to a heavy dead branch thick with sharp broken limbs. It wasn't designed to crush. It was designed to maim, to puncture. He smeared it with mud and leaves for camouflage. He ran the tripwire, thin and black and nearly invisible, across the trail, 6 inches off the ground. He wasn't done. He moved another 50 yards down the trail and found a spot where the path narrowed between 2 large rocks. He planted the small block of C4 at the base of the rock on the right, packing mud and wet leaves around it. He didn't have a blasting cap, but he had a rifle round and a piece of scrap metal from the ZIL's fender he'd pocketed. He rigged a simple pressure plate, a balanced cantilever design. Step on the plate, the rifle round fires into the C4. It was a 1 in 100 chance the impact would detonate the plastic explosive. But 1 in 100 was better than 0. And even if it didn't detonate, the gunshot would be an alarm. It would make them stop. It would make them think. He climbed a tree overlooking the trail and waited, becoming as still as the stone around him. An hour later, they came. The 2 massive dogs were in the lead, pulling their handlers forward, their noses to the ground. Behind them, moving with a fluid, predatory grace, were 6 men in dark combat gear. They moved like wraiths, their weapons held at the ready. One of them was sweeping a thermal imager back and forth. In the center of the group was the small, neat officer, Colonel Kim. He wasn't walking. He was flowing through the woods, his eyes missing nothing. The dogs stopped at the spot where Brill had separated from the seals. They whined, confused by the split trail. One went this way, a handler said, pointing down the game trail. The others went north. Colonel Kim came forward. He studied the ground, then looked down the narrow trail. The lone man is the threat, he said. He is the one who laid the trap for the helicopter. He is trying to lead us away. A classic rearguard action. He looked at his men. He thinks we are fools. He thinks we will follow him. He turned to the handler. Take 2 men and follow the main group. Do not engage. Report their position. We will deal with the decoy. Kim and the 3 remaining soldiers started down the game trail. The lead soldier had the thermal imager. He was sweeping it in a slow, careful arc. Brill held his breath. The thermal would see him if he wasn't careful. But he was cold, his body temperature low from the river crossing. And he was behind a thick screen of leaves. The lead soldier stopped. He pointed the imager at the ground. Sir. A tripwire. Kim came forward. He knelt, his fingers tracing the thin wire without touching it. He followed it with his eyes to the bent sapling. He smiled, a cold, thin smile of appreciation. Clever. A deadfall. Simple. Effective. He looked at his men. You see, he is speaking to us. He is telling us he is here. And he is telling us he thinks we are careless. He gestured for his men to move around the trap. They stepped off the trail, moving slowly, their eyes scanning every tree, every shadow. They passed Brill's position. They were 20 feet away. He could smell the wet wool of their uniforms. He stayed perfectly still. They regrouped on the trail beyond the deadfall. They hadn't seen him. He is close, Kim whispered. He is watching us right now. They started forward again, moving even more cautiously. The lead soldier swept the path ahead with his foot before each step. They were good. They came to the narrow spot between the 2 rocks. The lead soldier put his foot down carefully, directly on the pressure plate. Chapter 16. The world dissolved into a flash of white light and a deafening roar. The pressure plate did its job. The rifle round fired. The 1 in 100 chance hit. The C4 detonated with a brutal, upward shearing force. It didn't just move the rock. It vaporized the front half of it, turning tons of granite into a superheated cloud of dust and shrapnel that ripped through the narrow pass. The lead soldier, the one with his foot on the plate, simply ceased to exist. The 2 soldiers behind him were scythed down by the blast, thrown back like rag dolls. Colonel Kim, farther back, was saved by the body of his point man. The concussion wave picked him up and slammed him against a tree. He lay there for a moment, stunned, his ears screaming, the world a blurry silent film. Brill didn't wait to admire his handiwork. He dropped from the tree before the first echo died, landing in a crouch. He didn't look back. He ran, melting into the woods, a ghost leaving a scene of carnage behind him. He ran north, following the faint trail left by Martinez and his men, his mind a cold, clear machine. The trap wasn't meant to kill them all. It was meant to make a statement. A loud one. It was meant to make Kim angry. An angry hunter makes mistakes. He caught up to them an hour later. They'd found a place that was either a blessing or a tomb. Perched on the side of a steep hill, half swallowed by the forest, were the ruins of an old Buddhist monastery. Stone walls black with age and moss enclosed a courtyard choked with weeds. The curved roof of a central prayer hall had collapsed inward, leaving jagged timbers pointing at the sky like broken fingers. It offered shelter from the wind, but it was a trap. One way in, one way out. Martinez had posted Williams as a lookout near the crumbling main gate. The sniper saw Brill coming and gave a low whistle. "Thought you decided to stay for the party," Williams whispered as Brill slipped past him. His hands were wrapped in strips of cloth torn from his uniform, but he held his rifle like it was part of his arm. "I set off some fireworks and left," Brill said. He found the others in what was once the main hall. Martinez had managed to get a small smokeless fire going in a corner, using dry wood from a collapsed beam. The small flames cast flickering shadows on the stone faces of crumbling statues. Shen was lying by the fire, his leg propped up, his face pale but his eyes alert. Jackson was next to him, shivering under a thin blanket, his breathing shallow. "How are they?" Brill asked Martinez, his voice low. "Alive," Martinez said. It was all he needed to say. "Your fireworks, we heard it." "So did every soldier in this province," Brill said. "They'll be looking for the blast site. That buys us an hour, maybe two. Then they'll realize it was a sideshow and come looking for us again." "We needed the rest," Martinez said, his gaze fixed on his wounded men. Shen was about to pass out. "Jackson's fever is getting worse." Brill nodded. He looked at their weapons. 4 rifles leaned against the wall. "How are we on ammo?" Martinez didn't have to check. "Between us? 2 full magazines and maybe 20 loose rounds. Williams has been doing the Lord's work, but he's been doing it 1 round at a time. We can't afford a real fight." "We won't get a choice," Brill said. They fell into a tense silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and Jackson's labored breathing. This was the worst part of any operation. The waiting. The quiet moments when the cold and the exhaustion and the fear had time to creep in. "You ever think about what happens after?" Williams asked from the doorway, his voice barely a whisper. No one answered for a moment. "I try not to," Martinez said finally. "Think about the next objective. That's all. Get the men to the extraction. Everything else is noise." "I think about it," Williams said. "I think about sitting on a porch in Alabama, drinking sweet tea, watching the sun go down. Nothing but crickets and heat lightning. No sirens. No gunfire." He paused. "I wonder if I'll remember what quiet sounds like." Before anyone could answer, he stiffened. "Company," he hissed. Brill was at the wall in a second, peering through a crack in the stone next to Williams. A patrol was coming up the path to the monastery. Not Kim's night tigers. These were regular army. 6 of them. Moving carelessly, their rifles slung, talking and laughing. A routine patrol, probably sent to check on the old ruins, something they'd done 100 times before. "They haven't seen us," Brill whispered. "They will," Martinez said, coming up behind them. "The fire. They'll smell the smoke any second." The lead soldier, a young corporal with a cocky swagger, stopped. He sniffed the air. He looked toward the monastery gate, his brow furrowed. He said something to the man next to him, who shrugged. The corporal unslung his rifle. "Damn it," Martinez breathed. "We can't let them radio our position," Brill said. "We have to take them out. Quietly." "Quiet went out the window when you blew up that rock," Martinez countered. "And we don't have the ammo for a firefight." "We don't shoot unless we have to," Brill said. "They're sloppy. We use that." He looked at Martinez and Williams. "You two take the gate. Wait for them to come through. I'll take the wall. When they're inside the courtyard, we close the trap." Martinez nodded. He and Williams melted back into the shadows around the main gate. Brill moved along the inside of the courtyard wall, climbing onto a pile of fallen stones that gave him a clear angle on the entrance. The patrol advanced cautiously now. The corporal motioned for 2 of his men to flank the gate, while he and the other 3 came straight through the main entrance. They stepped into the courtyard, their eyes trying to adjust to the shadows. They saw the fire. "Hello," the corporal called out, his voice uncertain. Martinez and Williams opened up. Their rifles were on semi-auto, single deliberate shots. The corporal and the 2 men with him went down in a heap before they could even raise their weapons. It was brutal, efficient execution. The 2 flankers outside opened fire, spraying bullets wildly into the courtyard. One of them was screaming into his radio. "The radio!" Brill yelled. He vaulted over the wall, landing on the flanker with the radio. The man grunted as they hit the ground. Brill's knife came out, a flicker of steel in the gloom. The man went limp. The last soldier stood frozen for a second, his eyes wide with terror, seeing his entire squad wiped out in seconds. He turned to run. Williams, framed in the monastery gate, fired once. The soldier fell face first in the dirt and didn't move. Silence. The firefight had lasted less than 10 seconds. Brill stood up, breathing hard. He grabbed the radio from the dead soldier. It was still squawking, an excited voice demanding a report. Brill smashed it against a rock. Martinez came out of the gate, his face grim. So much for quiet. He looked at the bodies. Checked them for ammo. They stripped the dead soldiers of their magazines and loose rounds. It wasn't much. The North Korean army was notoriously stingy with ammunition for its regular troops. "This gives us maybe one more good fight," Williams said, stuffing a magazine into his pouch. "After that, we're throwing rocks." "We have to go," Brill said. "That radio call, it was enough. They know we're here. Kim will be on his way." They scrambled back into the prayer hall. Martinez kicked out the fire, plunging the ruins into darkness. "Get them up," Martinez ordered. They hauled Shen and Jackson to their feet. They were leaving their sanctuary, their tomb, and heading back into the night. They were colder, more tired, and more desperate than before. As they slipped out the back of the monastery, through a collapsed section of wall that led directly into the deep woods, Brill stopped and listened. He could hear it in the distance, faint but unmistakable. The sound of dogs barking. Not the random yapping of village mutts. This was the deep, baying cry of hunters who had found the scent. They were coming. Chapter 17. The barking was closer now. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence in the woods, a promise of violence coming at them through the dark. They moved through a landscape of jagged rocks and grasping thorns, the forest floor a treacherous carpet of roots and loose stones. Every 50 yards, they had to stop. Shen would lean against a tree, his face slick with sweat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Jackson was a dead weight, a mumbling, feverish sack of flesh that Martinez and Williams had to drag between them. They were making maybe a quarter mile an hour. They weren't escaping, they were just postponing the inevitable. Brill, scouting ahead, found the place. A narrow pass, a choke point where the trail squeezed between a sheer rock face on one side and a steep 100-foot drop on the other. It was a natural funnel. A perfect place to make a stand. A perfect place to die. He waited for them to catch up. They stumbled into the small clearing before the pass, collapsing like marathon runners at a finish line that was also a grave. "This is it," Martinez panted, easing Jackson to the ground. "We can hold them here for a while." "For a while isn't long enough," Brill said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a man doing brutal calculus. "They won't come straight up the pass. They know we're here. They'll pin us down with a small force and send the rest to flank us. They'll be above us and behind us in an hour." "So we fight," Martinez said, checking the action on his rifle. "With what?" Brill countered. "We have enough ammo for 3 minutes of a real firefight. You know it, and I know it." He looked at Shen, then at the shivering form of Jackson. "And they can't fight at all. They can barely walk." Martinez's head snapped up. His one good eye narrowed, fixing on Brill. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the mission has changed," Brill said. "The objective was to get 4 SEALs out. That objective is no longer achievable. The new objective is to get some of you out." The clearing went silent, the only sound the wind whispering through the pines and the distant eager barking of the dogs. "No," Martinez said. The word was quiet, but it was as hard and final as a slammed door. "We don't leave our people. Ever." "It's not leaving them," Brill said, his voice still maddeningly calm. "It's recognizing reality. You keep them with you, you all die. Here. In these rocks. You let them go, and you and Williams might have a chance." "A chance to do what?" "Run. A chance to get to the extraction point. A chance to complete the mission. A chance to tell someone what happened here." The mission is the men, Martinez shot back, his voice rising. It's always the men. The mission is what the men in Washington say it is, Brill corrected him. And they'd rather have 2 of you back than none. They'd rather have 1 of you back than none. They'd trade all 4 of you for a photograph of a new missile silo. That's the world we live in. You can die for your code, or you can live for the mission. Williams, who had been listening silently, spoke up. He's right, Chief. Martinez looked at him, his face a mask of betrayal. You too, Willie. Look at them, Williams said, his voice raspy. He gestured with his chin toward Shen and Jackson. Shen's got a hole in his leg, and God knows what in his side. Doc is burning up. Every step we take with them is a step closer to all of us getting caught. It's a tactical problem. That's all it is. They're not a problem, Martinez snarled. They're our brothers. It was Shen who ended it. He pushed himself up, leaning on his rifle like a crutch. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. He's right, Marcus. Martinez looked at him. Stay out of this, Sam. No, Shen said. I'm in the middle of it. Look at me. I'm a liability. I can't keep up. Every minute you spend helping me is a minute Kim's hunters get closer to you. You want to die for your code? Fine. But don't ask me to die for it. I'd rather my death bought you an hour of running time. We don't do this, Martinez insisted, his voice cracking with the strain. We don't. Yes, we do, Shen said. We adapt. We overcome. That's the other part of the code, isn't it? Well, this is us adapting. He looked at Brill. This pass. Is it defensible? For a while, Brill said. Then we'll make it a while longer, Shen said. He looked back at Martinez. You take Jackson and Williams and you go. You don't stop. You don't look back. You get to the water, and you tell them what happened. That's an order. You can't give me an order, Martinez said. I'm not, Shen said. I'm giving you a solution to your tactical problem. He stays with me. He nodded at Brill. 2 men can hold this pass longer than 5. We'll make noise. We'll keep them busy. We'll give you a head start. The logic was brutal. And it was flawless. Martinez looked from Shen's determined face to Brill's impassive one. He saw the truth. He was the commander. And the commander sometimes had to sacrifice a piece to save the game. He knelt and opened their dwindling supply pack. He took out the last syringe of morphine. He took out the last 2 full magazines for the Alaska 47S. He took out the last of the water. He pushed it all toward Shen. For you, he said, his voice thick. Shen shook his head. Give the morphine to Jackson. He'll need it more than me on the trail. Martinez's face crumpled for a second, then hardened again into a commander's mask. He nodded. He injected the unconscious Jackson with the last of the painkiller. He stood up and faced Brill. You get him through this, you hear me? I'm not getting him through anything, Brill said. I'm staying with him. That's the deal. Martinez held his gaze for a long moment. He saw no deception there. Just a cold, hard purpose. He turned to Williams. Let's go. Williams walked over to Shen. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand on Shen's shoulder. Shen reached up with his good hand and clasped it. Give him hell, Willie, Shen said. Always do, Williams whispered. Martinez and Williams lifted Jackson between them. The medic was a dead weight, lost to the world. They turned and started up the trail, away from the pass. They didn't look back. They just disappeared into the darkness. Brill and Shen were alone. The sound of the dogs was much closer now, a frantic, hungry chorus. Well, Shen said, sinking back to the ground. This is going to be an interesting evening. Brill didn't answer. He was already moving, checking the sight lines from behind a cluster of rocks, placing the 2 full magazines where he could reach them easily. He took his own rifle, the one he'd carried from the sub, and chambered around. The click was loud and final in the quiet pass. Chapter 18. The pass was a shooting gallery, and they were the prizes. Brill lay behind a V-shaped outcrop of granite, the rock still cold from the night. He had a clear view of the trail for 75 yards before it disappeared into the woods. Shen was 10 feet to his left, tucked into a shallow depression that gave him cover from the front but left his flank exposed. It was the best they could do. "They'll send the dogs first," Shen said, his voice tight. He had his rifle propped on a rock, but his hands were shaking, not from fear but from the pain and the cold. "To draw our fire. Pinpoint our positions." "I know," Brill said. He wasn't looking at Shen. He was looking at the dark maw of the forest where the trail began. "So don't shoot the dogs," Shen continued, thinking aloud, the tactician in him overriding the wounded man. "Shoot the handlers. A dog without a handler is just a dog. It'll get confused." "I know," Brill said again. "And when they lay down suppressive fire, they'll try to flank from the right. The drop-off side. They'll assume we're watching the rock face. It's what I would do." "Me too." Shen fell silent. He'd said his piece. He trusted the ghost to know what to do. He leaned his head back against the rock, his eyes closing for a second. "Hey, ghost." "Yeah." "You got a first name?" "No," Brill said. The first dog came out of the woods. It was a massive, shaggy beast, moving low to the ground, its nose working furiously. It didn't bark. It was silent, a four-legged hunter. A moment later, its handler appeared, a soldier in dark fatigues, holding the leash in one hand and a rifle in the other. A second dog and handler emerged 50 feet to the left. They were spreading out, trying to get across scent. Brill waited. He let them get closer. The dogs were agitated, whining low in their throats, straining at their leashes. They knew they were close. The first handler was 40 yards away. He was focused on the dog, letting it pull him forward. Brill let out half a breath, took up the slack on his trigger and squeezed. The shot was a flat crack in the pre-dawn gloom. The handler's head snapped back, and he went down without a sound. The dog, suddenly free, stopped and looked back at its master, confused. Shen fired a split second after Brill. His shot took the second handler in the throat. The man dropped his leash, clutching at his neck as he gargled on his own blood. The two dogs, leaderless, began to bark, a chaotic panic sound. The woods erupted. Muzzle flashes winked from a dozen different positions as the night tigers opened up. It wasn't a blind spray, it was controlled, disciplined fire aimed at the two spots where the shots had come from. Bullets hammered the granite around Brill's head, chipping off stone fragments that stung his face. "They're good," Shen grunted, ducking as a round ricocheted off the rock above him. "They're about to get better," Brill said. He could see movement on the right, just as Shen had predicted. Two soldiers, moving fast and low, trying to get to the edge of the ravine to flank them. Brill shifted his position, firing a short burst that kicked up dirt in front of the flanking soldiers, forcing them to dive for cover. He wasn't trying to hit them. He was just letting them know he saw them. A grenade came sailing through the air, a dark egg against the graying sky. It landed short, exploding with a deafening crump that showered them with dirt and rocks. "They're ranging us," Shen yelled. Another grenade came, this one landing closer. Shrapnel whined past Brill's ear. "We have to move," Brill said. "Fall back 10 yards. There's another cluster of rocks. Go." He laid down a burst of covering fire while Shen, dragging his wounded leg, scrambled back. The pain must have been excruciating, but he didn't make a sound. Brill fired until his magazine was empty, then fell back himself, sliding into the new position as Shen slapped a fresh magazine into his rifle and took over. They were playing a deadly game of leapfrog, trading space for time. Colonel Kim stood behind a thick pine tree, his binoculars trained on the pass. He was calm. The rage he'd felt at the sight of the explosion had cooled into a focused, icy resolve. "They are two men," he said to his lieutenant. "One of them is wounded. They are forcing us to fight for every foot of ground." "We could call in mortars, sir," the lieutenant suggested. "No," Kim said. "Mortars are imprecise. They would tear up the hillside and tell every American satellite where we are." And I do not want to simply kill these men. I want to capture one of them. The one who is not wounded. I want to look him in the eye and ask him his name. He lowered his binoculars. Send Sergeant Park's team up the right flank. All the way around. It will take them 20 minutes. Tell them to be silent. The rest of us will keep them busy here. The firefight intensified. The night tigers were patient. They laid down a steady, methodical rhythm of fire, pinning Brill and Shen down, forcing them to burn through their precious ammunition. For every 1 round Brill fired, 10 came back at him. I'm down to my last magazine, Shen called out, his voice strained. He had propped himself up against a rock, his legs stretched out in front of him. A dark, wet patch was spreading on his trouser leg. Make every shot count, Brill said. It was a stupid thing to say. A line from a bad movie. But it was all he had. He knew they were being flanked. He could feel it. The pressure from the front was too consistent, too designed. It was meant to hold their attention. He peered over his rock, trying to see the higher ground above the pass, but it was impossible. He looked at Shen. The SEAL's face was chalky, his lips blue. He was fading. They had maybe 5 more minutes before he passed out from blood loss. Or before the flanking team got into position. Hey Ghost, Shen said, his voice weaker now. Save your breath. No, listen, Shen insisted. He fumbled inside his jacket. My knife. In the boot. There's a piece of flint taped to the sheath. And I have 2 loose rounds left in my pocket. Brill looked at him, not understanding. The grenades, Shen whispered, a faint, crafty smile touching his lips. They're Russian F1S. The pin, the spoon, but the fuse is powder train. Not chemical. You can light it. Brill understood. A new volley of fire erupted from the front, heavier this time. It was the final push. And at the same time, he heard a scrape of a boot on rock from above him and to his right. The flanking team was in position. They were trapped. Shen saw it in his eyes. It's time, he said. He took one of the grenades from his belt. With clumsy, painful movements, he pulled the pin. The spoon, the safety lever, sprang away with a metallic ping. The fuse was live. He had 4 seconds. Give me cover, Shen said. Brill didn't hesitate. He stood up, exposing himself from the waist up, and emptied his magazine at the soldiers on the high ground, firing a long, sweeping burst that made them duck for cover. In that moment, Shen acted. He didn't try to throw the grenade. He wasn't strong enough. Instead, he used his knife to strike the flint against the scrap of metal from the Zill which he'd kept. A shower of sparks fell onto the loose powder he'd poured from one of his last bullets, onto the grenade's fuse housing. The fuse caught, sputtering like a tiny, angry firework. Shen held the live grenade to his chest, pulling it in tight like a lover. He looked at Brill, his eyes suddenly clear. Go, he said. Then he rolled out from behind the rock, directly into the line of fire from the front. He was a target they couldn't miss. A dozen rounds hit him at once, stitching a bloody line across his chest and stomach. But his death accomplished its purpose. He had drawn their fire, all of it. Brill saw the soldiers on the ridge pop up, seeing their chance. He saw Colonel Kim step out from behind his tree, his pistol raised. Then the grenade in Shen's arms detonated. The explosion was funneled by the rock pass, a focused, brutal concussion of shrapnel and force that ripped through the North Korean position. The soldiers on the ridge were blown off their feet. The men at the front were shredded. Brill was already gone. He used the deafening roar of the blast to fall back, scrambling over the rocks, disappearing into the deep woods behind the pass, leaving the dead and the dying behind. He didn't look back. He just ran. Chapter 19. Brill ran. He didn't run with the desperate, lung-searing panic of a hunted animal. He ran with the steady, ground-eating rhythm of a machine built for one purpose, to put distance between himself and death. The thunder of Shen's final act had bought him seconds. The confusion would buy him minutes. He had to turn those minutes into miles. The forest was a black, tangled maze, but he moved through it like he had a map printed on the inside of his eyelids, He didn't stick to the high ground. That's where they would expect him to go, for observation. He stayed low, following the natural contours of the land, using streambeds and thickets of thorny scrub to hide his passage. The sound of the pursuit, shouts, the occasional gunshot as a nervous soldier fired at a shadow, faded behind him. For now, he was alone again. The feeling was familiar, comfortable. The responsibility for the SEALs had been a weight, a variable in a complex equation. Now the math was simpler. Survival, evasion, rendezvous. The three pillars of his solitary church. Shen's face, clear and calm in the instant before the grenade went off, flashed in his mind. Brill pushed it away. It was noise. He had a mission to complete. For 3 hours he moved north, a ghost in the woods. He doubled back on his own trail twice, laying false paths that led to dead ends, leaving just enough sign to be found to waste their time. He walked backwards for 100 yards in a shallow creek, painstakingly brushing away his footprints on the bank where he exited. He was bleeding them, not with bullets, but with minutes with frustration. He knew Colonel Kim would be on his trail. A man like that wouldn't give up. He would see the tricks, but he would still have to check them. It all took time. The sun was a pale, watery smudge in the eastern sky when Brill realized he had a new problem. He was moving fast, faster than he ever could have with the wounded SEALs. But Martinez and Williams had a significant head start. And they were heading for a specific point on the coast. The hunters would know that. Kim wouldn't just chase, he would leapfrog, sending teams ahead to block the logical routes to the sea. Brill couldn't catch up to the SEALs on foot before they walked into a new trap. And the extraction window was a fixed point in time. He needed speed. He needed a road. He changed his direction, moving east, toward the low-lying farmlands that separated the mountains from the coast. He came to the edge of the forest and lay on a small rise, looking down at a 2-lane paved road. It was empty. A farmer on a bicycle wobbled past, followed by an ox pulling a cart. An hour later, a military truck rumbled by, heading south. This wasn't going to work. He couldn't just wait for the right vehicle to come along. He had to make his own opportunity. He needed a place where a vehicle would be stationary. A checkpoint. He followed the road from the cover of the trees for 2 miles. Then he saw it. A makeshift checkpoint set up where a smaller dirt road intersected the main one. It wasn't much. A striped wooden barrier, a small guard shack that looked like it had been nailed together from scrap wood, and a single strand of concertina wire pulled across the dirt road. Brill settled in to watch. The checkpoint was manned by 2 soldiers. One was a sergeant, a man in his 40s with a gut that strained the buttons of his tunic and a face that had given up on life years ago. The other was a private, a kid so young he had to have lied about his age, with a bad case of acne and a worse case of boredom. The routine was a study in apathy. The sergeant sat in the shack, reading a newspaper. The kid stood by the barrier, leaning on his rifle, occasionally kicking at a rock. When a vehicle approached, the kid would wave it down. The sergeant would lumber out of the shack, glance at the driver's papers with a profound lack of interest, and wave them on. They stopped a farm truck, a bus, and 2 civilian cars in the hour that Brill watched. Parked behind the shack, half hidden by a canvas tarp, was a motorcycle. It was a Chinese copy of an old BMW bike, a military model with a sidecar, painted a faded, chipped green. It was ugly. And it was perfect. Brill waited for the lull. After the bus went through, the road was quiet. The sergeant went back into his shack. The kid started pacing, a 10-foot line back and forth, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He looked at the sky. He looked at his watch. He looked at the trees. Brill moved. He circled around, coming up behind the guard shack from the direction of the dirt road. The concertina wire was a joke. He stepped over it easily. He moved up to the back of the shack. It had a single, dirty window. He peered through. The sergeant was still reading, his head bowed. Brill slipped around the side of the shack. The kid was at the far end of his 10-foot pacing line, his back to him. Brill closed the distance in 5 silent strides. The kid must have heard something, the whisper of cloth, the crunch of a single piece of gravel. He started to turn. Brill didn't give him the chance. His hand shot out, clamping over the kid's mouth, his other arm wrapping around his chest, pinning his arms. He lifted the kid off his feet and dragged him back behind the shack, out of sight of the road. The kid's eyes were wide with terror. He thrashed, his boots kicking uselessly. Brill put his mouth next to the kid's ear. "Don't," he whispered in Korean. It was the only word he said. He gave the kid's neck a sharp, violent twist. There was a dry snap. The struggling stopped. Brill lowered the body to the ground and took the rifle. He looked at the shack. The sergeant hadn't moved. He was still lost in his paper. Brill walked to the door of the shack. He didn't throw it open. He pushed it gently. It swung inward with a low creak. The sergeant looked up, his eyes lazy, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it now, you little?" The words died in his throat. He was looking at a face he didn't know, at eyes that were as cold and gray as a winter sea. He was looking at the muzzle of a rifle. He opened his mouth to yell. Brill shot him once through the newspaper. The sound was muffled, a flat thump. The sergeant was thrown back in his chair, a dark hole appearing in his chest. The chair tipped over, and he crashed to the floor amidst a flutter of cheap newsprint. Brill stepped into the shack. He listened. The road was still quiet. He grabbed the sergeant's pistol and a spare magazine from his belt. He took the man's keys. He walked out and went to the motorcycle. He threw the tarp off. The tires were decent. The gas tank was 3/4 full. One of the keys from the sergeant's belt fit the ignition. He wheeled the bike away from the shack and out onto the road, pointing it north. He swung his leg over the seat. The leather was cracked and cold. He turned the key. The engine was cold-blooded. He kicked the starter once, twice. On the third kick, it caught, sputtering to life with a loud, clattering roar that shattered the morning quiet. Chapter 20. The motorcycle roared, a loud, obnoxious beast, and Brill pointed it north. The wind tore at his stolen uniform, trying to rip it from his body. Every rattling cough of the engine was an advertisement of his position, a broadcast to every soldier and informant in the province. But it was faster than running. He pushed the bike, a clumsy, heavy machine with all the nimble grace of a farm tractor. The sidecar made it want to pull to the right, and he had to fight the handlebars to keep it straight. He didn't stay on the main road. That was suicide. He used the map in his head, the one he'd been building since he arrived, and took the secondary roads, the dirt tracks that connected one forgotten village to the next. He passed a woman walking with a goat. She stared at him, her face a blank mask of peasant indifference, then looked away, wanting no part of whatever trouble a lone soldier on a speeding motorcycle represented. He blew past a convoy of ox carts hauling cabbages, the drivers looking up with slow bovine curiosity. Twice he had to make a hard turn onto an even smaller path, killing the engine and coasting into a ditch as the sound of an approaching patrol truck grew louder. He lay flat, the motorcycle on its side next to him, listening as the trucks rumbled past on the main road, filled with soldiers who were looking for him but expecting to find him in the woods on foot. They weren't looking for a man bold enough or stupid enough to be joyriding through their backyard. The sun climbed higher. The air began to lose its mountain chill and take on a damp, salty tang. He was getting close. He could smell the sea. He drove the motorcycle until it died. The engine sputtered, coughed, and went silent in a small fishing village that looked like it had been clinging to the rocks by its fingernails for 1,000 years. The gas tank was empty. He didn't bother hiding the bike. He just left it by the side of the road and walked away, another piece of abandoned military hardware in a country littered with it. The village smelled of salt, drying fish, and diesel. Old men with faces like leather sat on upturned boats, mending nets with gnarled fingers. They watched him pass, their eyes missing nothing. He was a soldier, but he was a stranger. He didn't stop. He walked through the village and onto the rocky coastline beyond. He knew this place. The jagged black rocks, the stunted wind-twisted pines, the angry surf crashing against the shore. This was the beach where he'd come ashore, what felt like a lifetime ago. The extraction point. He moved carefully now, staying low, using the rocks for cover. The beach was a crescent of gray sand and stone, maybe 200 yards long, nestled between two towering headlands. It looked empty. Desolate. He found a spot high up in the rocks, a natural sniper's nest that gave him a view of the entire cove. He pulled out his monocular and scanned the area. He saw nothing. No sign of the seals. No sign of the enemy. Just the gulls and the waves. He waited. He knew they would be cautious. They wouldn't just be sitting on the beach, waiting for a ride. He gave the signal. It wasn't a whistle or a call. It was a glint of light. He took a small piece of polished metal from his pocket, the back of a compass, and flashed it 3 times toward a dense cluster of rocks at the far end of the beach. 1, 2, 3. A pause. Then 2 quick flashes. 4, 5. The call sign of their mission. He waited. For a full minute, nothing happened. He was about to flash the signal again, when he saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows of the rocks he'd signaled. A man's head. Then another. Brill stood up and walked down onto the beach. Martinez and Williams met him halfway. They looked like hell. Their faces were scratched and gaunt, their eyes sunk deep in their sockets. Williams was still favoring his hands, holding them curled in front of him like wounded birds. "We saw the bike," Martinez said, his voice a low rasp. "Figured it had to be you. No one else is that crazy." "Where's Jackson?" Brill asked. "Over here," Martinez said, leading him back to the rocks. They had found a small cave, barely a hollow in the rock face, just big enough to shelter them from the wind. Jackson was lying inside, wrapped in their last 2 jackets. His eyes were open, but they were glassy, unfocused. His skin had a grayish pallor. "The morphine wore off a few hours ago," Williams said quietly. "He's in a bad way. The infection, it's moving fast." "We found the boat," Martinez said, changing the subject. He pointed toward a pile of driftwood and seaweed, farther down the beach. "Right where you said you buried your gear. The inflatable is good. Motor looks okay. But the radio..." He held it up. It had a bullet hole, clean through the middle of it. "We got nothing. No way to call the ship." Brill looked out at the empty expanse of the sea. The USS Leviathan was out there, somewhere over the horizon. But the ocean was a big place. "The extraction window opens in 20 minutes, Martinez said. "They're supposed to be holding 2 miles offshore, waiting for our signal. A signal we can't send." "So they're not coming," Williams said. It wasn't a question. "They'll wait," Brill said. "Standard protocol is to hold position for 12 hours. They won't leave early." "That's a long time to sit on this beach," Martinez said. He looked up at the coastal road that ran along the cliffs above them. "And I don't think we have that long." As if on cue, they heard it. The distant sound of an engine. A truck. It was moving slowly along the coastal road, stopping every few hundred yards. Brill put his monocular to his eye. He could see the truck clearly. It was a troop transport. Soldiers were getting out, fanning into the woods and onto the cliffs, sweeping the area. "They're here," Williams said, his voice flat. "Kim," Brill said. "He leapfrogged us. He knew we were coming to the coast." Another sound reached them, carried on the wind. The faint but unmistakable baying of dogs. "They're coming from both sides," Martinez said. "Boxing us in." He looked at the boat, then at the sea. "We have 1 move left. To go out there blind," Williams said. "We could drift for days. Doc won't last that long." "He won't last another hour if we stay here," Martinez countered. "At least out there we have a chance. A slim one, but it's a chance." Brill was scanning the water. He saw a flicker of movement far out to sea. A patrol boat. A North Korean gunboat, moving in a slow, deliberate search pattern. Then he saw another one, farther to the south. They were setting up a blockade. "We're out of time," Brill said. He turned, and started toward the pile of driftwood where the boat was hidden. "Let's go." Martinez and Williams looked at each other, then nodded. They went to Jackson, lifting him as gently as they could. The medic groaned, a low animal sound of pure misery. They uncovered the boat, a black Zodiac inflatable still holding air. The small outboard motor was clamped to the transom. They began to drag it across the sand, toward the crashing surf. The waves were high, churning the gray water into a cold, violent froth. A shout echoed from the cliffs above them. A soldier had spotted them. He was pointing, yelling. A rifle shot cracked, the bullet kicking up sand just feet from the boat. Chapter 21. The rifle shot cracked the air, and the bullet dug a small, angry divot in the wet sand inches from Brill's foot. The sound was followed by a chorus of shouts from the cliffs above. They had been a curiosity a moment ago. Now they were a target. "Go! Go!" Martinez roared, his voice a raw command against the thunder of the surf. They stopped dragging the Zodiac and started shoving it, a desperate, stumbling charge into the churning gray water. The first wave hit them like a fist, a wall of frigid water that stole their breath and tried to rip the boat from their hands. "Lift it!" Brill yelled. "Get the nose up!" Another shot, then a volley. Bullets zipped past them, kicking up plumes of spray, making the water around them dance. Williams, his back to the shore, raised his rifle and fired 3 quick aimed shots at the muzzle flashes on the cliff. It wasn't enough to stop them, but it made them duck. It bought a second. They were waist deep now, fighting a war on 2 fronts. The North Koreans were on the cliffs, and the sea was trying to beat them back to shore. A huge wave crashed over them, submerging them completely. Brill came up sputtering, his hand still clamped to the side of the boat. He saw Martinez doing the same, his one good eye burning with fierce determination. They still had Jackson somehow wedged between them, his unconscious form a dead weight. "The motor," Martinez screamed, his voice hoarse. "It'll be flooded." "Worry about that later," Brill shouted back. "Get past the breakers." They pushed forward, a brutal inch-by-inch battle. Each wave was a physical blow, threatening to swamp the boat or tear it away. Williams fired again, his movements economical, professional despite the chaos. He was making his last few rounds count, forcing the soldiers on the cliff to stay behind cover. They were almost through the worst of the surf when a wave caught the boat sideways, lifting it and threatening to capsize it. Brill threw his weight against the high side, his boots scrabbling for purchase on the shifting sandy bottom. Martinez did the same on the other side. For a heart-stopping second, the boat teetered, half full of water, on the verge of flipping. Then it slammed back down with a jarring crash. "We're through," Martinez yelled. "Get in." Brill heaved Jackson's torso over the side, and Martinez and Williams shoved the rest of him in. He flopped onto the floor of the boat, like a landed fish. Williams scrambled in after him, immediately turning to face the shore, his rifle ready. Brill pushed Martinez toward the stern. "Get the motor. I'll hold it steady." Martinez clambered over the side, landing next to the small outboard. He ripped the cover off. Water poured out of it. It soaked. "Doesn't matter," Brill yelled, treading water as he held the boat's nose into the oncoming swells. "Try it." Martinez grabbed the pull cord. He braced himself and gave it a hard yank. The cord came out with a wet, rasping sound, but the engine only gave a pathetic gurgle. On the cliffs, the volume of fire increased. They had better positions now. Bullets whipped over the boat, and one tore through the inflatable's rubber tube with a sound like a giant's sigh. Air hissed out, and the side of the boat began to go soft. "We're hit," Williams shouted. "She's losing air." "Try it again," Brill yelled at Martinez. Martinez wrapped the cord around his hand, his knuckles white. He set his jaw and pulled again, a full-body effort, his muscles straining. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. "Come on, you bitch," Martinez snarled at the motor, his voice a low prayer of hate. He pulled again. A cough. A sputter. Then almost it caught. The engine chugged for a second, a single hopeful putt-putt-putt, before dying again. "Almost," Williams yelled. "Again." Brill was still in the water, the cold seeping into him, his legs growing numb. He looked out to sea. The North Korean patrol boats were closer now. No longer specks on the horizon, they were sleek gray predators, cutting white wakes as they converged on the cove. They were still a mile out, but they were coming fast. "They see us," Brill shouted. "Mark us now." Martinez gave the cord another desperate pull. Nothing. He was panting, his energy flagging. He pulled again, and this time as he leaned back, a bullet from the cliff caught him high in the left shoulder. The impact spun him around. He cried out, a sharp gasp of pain, and collapsed against the motor, his arm going limp. A dark stain spread rapidly across the shoulder of his jacket. "Marcus," Williams yelled, crawling toward him. "I'm all right," Martinez gritted out, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He pushed Williams away with his good arm. "Stay on the gun. Keep their heads down." He looked at the pull cord, then at his useless left arm. He wrapped the cord around his right hand again, ignoring the blood that was now running down his sleeve. He braced his feet against the floor of the deflating boat, his body trembling with pain and effort. "Come on," he whispered. He threw all of his weight, all of his remaining strength into one last desperate pull. The engine sputtered. It coughed. It caught. The roar of the two-stroke motor was the most beautiful sound in the world. It wasn't a smooth roar, it was ragged, angry, but it was alive. "Get in," Martinez yelled at Brill. Brill hauled himself over the side of the rapidly deflating boat, landing next to the still unconscious Jackson. Martinez, his face a mask of agony, twisted the throttle with his good hand. The Zodiac leapt forward, its nose rising out of the water. He steered them away from the shore, away from the gunfire, and out toward the open hostile sea. They were moving, a crippled boat with a wounded crew, heading straight for the closing jaws of the North Korean blockade. Chapter 22. The Zodiac skipped across the tops of the waves, a wounded duck fleeing a pack of wolves. The port side tube, punctured by the rifle round from the cliff, was almost completely flat, making the boat list heavily. Every time they hit a swell, gray water sloshed over the side, cold and heavy. Brill and Williams were bailing with their hands, a frantic, useless effort. Martinez was a statue carved from pain at the stern. He held the tiller of the outboard with his one good hand, his face the color of old parchment. The dark stain on his shoulder had spread down his arm. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon ahead, as if he could will the American ship to appear by sheer force of will. "They're gaining," Williams yelled over the scream of their small engine. He was looking back, his rifle held ready. "The one on the left is faster. He'll be on us in 5 minutes." Brill looked. The two North Korean patrol boats were no longer running parallel. They were splitting up, a classic pincer movement. One was coming straight for their stern, a big, ugly Chinese-made gunboat with a heavy machine gun mounted on the bow. The other, a faster, sleeker vessel, was swinging wide to cut off their path. "He's not trying to cut us off," Brill shouted, the salt spray stinging his eyes. "He's trying to get a better angle for his gunner. He wants to disable the motor." "Then we should give him a different target," Martinez grunted, his voice tight. "What have we got left?" Brill asked, turning to Williams. The sniper patted the pouches on his belt. 6 rounds, he said. "Maybe 7. Not enough to matter." Brill unslung his pack. The one he'd carried, all the way from the submarine. It was soaked, heavy with water. He pulled out the last block of his C4. It was a pathetic-looking half-pound slab of gray putty. He also had the remote detonator, the one that had set off the fuel truck. "Is that what I think it is?" Martinez asked, glancing back. "Our last trick," Brill said. He looked at the explosive, then at the fast-approaching boat. A plan, born of pure desperation, was forming in his head. It was a stupid plan. It had 100 ways to fail. "I need your jacket," Brill said to Williams. Williams looked at him, then shrugged and started to work his way out of the soaked garment. "You planning on surrendering?" "I don't think they care, if we're dressed for the occasion." "And I need your knife," Brill said to Martinez. Martinez, without taking his eyes off the water ahead, reached down to the sheath on his boot and pulled out his K-bar. He tossed it to Brill. Brill took the jacket and laid it flat on the floor of the boat. He began to pack the C4 into the inside pocket, molding it flat. He took the last of their gear, an empty water bottle, the useless radio, a spare ammunition pouch, and stuffed it into the jacket, giving it weight and bulk. "What's the play, Ghost?" Martinez asked, his voice strained. "They want a target," Brill said, his hands moving quickly, efficiently. "We'll give them one." He used Martinez's knife to cut a small hole in the jacket's collar, then threaded a piece of cord from his pack through it. He was creating a makeshift float. The faster patrol boat was closer now. 300 yards and closing. Brill could see the figures on its deck. 4 of them. 2 in the cockpit, 1 on the bow, and 1 manning a machine gun mounted amidships. "Willie," Brill said, not looking up. "When I tell you to, I need you to make them look at me. Not at the boat. At me. You want me to shoot at them with 6 rounds?" Williams asked, his voice incredulous. "No," Brill said. "I want you to miss them. Close enough to make them duck. I need their attention for about 10 seconds. The patrol boat was 200 yards out. Its bowgunner fired a short probing burst. The heavy rounds chewed up the water 20 yards to their right. They were ranging them. "Almost ready," Brill said. He held up the jacket, now a lumpy, waterlogged bundle with the C4 hidden inside. He held the small radio detonator in his other hand. "Any time now," Martinez grunted. The boat was losing more air, sitting lower in the water. The engine was starting to sputter as waves washed over it. "Okay, Willie," Brill said. "Now." Williams brought his rifle to his shoulder. He fired 3 shots, spaced a second apart. They weren't aimed at the men. They were aimed at the patrol boat's cockpit window. The rounds sparked off the steel frame, close enough to make the men on the deck flinch and duck instinctively. In that moment of distraction, Brill stood up. It was a crazy move, making himself a target. He swung the weighted jacket around his head once, twice, building momentum, and then hurled it as far as he could in the direction of the oncoming boat. The jacket hit the water with a heavy splash, about 50 yards away, then bobbed to the surface. The North Koreans saw it. They saw the man who had thrown it. The machine gunner on the patrol boat swung his weapon around and opened up, not at the Zodiac, but at Brill. Brill dropped to the floor of the boat, as a stream of tracers sizzled through the air where his head had been. "Did they take the bait?" he yelled. "They're looking at it," Williams reported, peering over the side. "The boat is slowing down, they're approaching it." Brill risked a look. The patrol boat had cut its speed, its crew cautious, suspicious. They were treating the floating jacket like a sea mine. They were circling it. "They think it's a bomb," Martinez said. "It is," Brill said, his thumb on the detonator. He waited. He watched the patrol boat complete its circle, and then move in, its bow nudging the floating jacket. A sailor with a long boat hook was leaning over, trying to snag it. "Close enough," Brill whispered. He pressed the button. The explosion was shockingly powerful in the open water. It erupted directly under the patrol boat's bow, a geyser of white water, black smoke, and twisted metal. The boat was lifted clean out of the sea, its back broken, and it fell back in 2 pieces, already sinking. The men in the Zodiac stared, stunned. "Holy," Williams breathed. But their celebration was cut short. The second gunboat, the bigger, slower one, was still coming. It had seen what happened, and its crew wasn't taking any chances. It opened up with its bow-mounted heavy machine gun from 500 yards away. The sea around the Zodiac erupted in a storm of heavy-caliber rounds. It was like driving through a hailstorm made of lead. The boat's remaining air tube was shredded, and the Zodiac collapsed, turning into little more than a floating rubber raft. The outboard motor, swamped by a wave, gave a final choked gasp and died. They were dead, in the water. Adrift on a sinking raft, with a North Korean gunboat bearing down on them, its guns blazing. And then Martinez saw it. He lifted his head, his good eyes scanning the horizon behind the gunboat. "Brill," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Brill looked. On the edge of the world, where the gray sea met the gray sky, was a new shape. It was long, low, and unmistakably military. A silhouette of purposeful, deadly gray. "Is that?" Williams started to say. "The Leviathan," Brill confirmed. She was there. But she was miles away. A lifetime away. Too far to help. The North Korean gunboat commander must have seen it too. He seemed to make a decision. His boat stopped firing, and instead surged forward, its engine roaring, closing the final distance. He wasn't going to sink them from afar. He was coming to finish the job up close. Chapter 23. The North Korean gunboat was 100 yards out and closing, a gray shark coming in for the kill. It wasn't a sleek patrol boat like the one Brill had blown to pieces. This was a bigger, uglier vessel. A Chinese-made Type 062 gunboat, slow and squat, with a twin-barreled 37mm cannon on the bow and another on the stern. It was designed to bully fishing trawlers, not fight a war, but right now it was the biggest thing in their world. The Zodiac was a waterlogged piece of rubber, barely afloat. The waves washed over it, each one trying to pull them under. Jackson was unconscious, his head lolling with the motion of the sea. Martinez was propped against the dead motor, his face ashen, his good hand clamped over the bloody mess of his shoulder. Williams had his rifle, but he only had a handful of rounds left. They were out of tricks. "Well," Williams said, his voice strangely calm as he looked at the approaching gunboat. "It was a good run." The gunboat commander, a man in a crisp officer's cap, stood on the bridge, watching them through binoculars. He wasn't firing. He was savoring it. He was going to motor right up to them, look them in the eye, and then blow them out of the water. "He's playing with us," Martinez grunted, spitting salt water. "No," Brill said. He was watching the officer, reading the man's posture. "He's not playing. He's curious. He saw one boat explode. He wants to know who we are before he kills us. He wants to take a prisoner. He wants a prize." "He's about to get one," Williams muttered. "One?" Brill said, his eyes still locked on the gunboat. "Not 4. He turned to Martinez. "When they get to 50 yards, you and Williams go over the side. Take Jackson with you." Martinez stared at him, his one good eye narrowed. "What did you say?" "You heard me. You go into the water. You swim away from the boat. Low in the water. You become a target that's hard to see. I stay here. I become a target that's impossible to miss." "Negative," Martinez said, the word a steel command despite the pain in his voice. "We stick together. That's the deal." "The deal changed when the motor died," Brill said, his voice flat and reasonable, which made it all the more infuriating. "Look at them. They have 2 heavy cannons, and at least 4 men with rifles. They can turn this raft and everything in it into chum from where they are right now. The only reason they haven't is because their commander wants a souvenir. I'm going to give him one to think about." "We don't leave a man," Martinez repeated, his jaw tight. "You're not leaving a man," Brill said. "You're leaving a ghost. I was never here, remember? Besides, you're not leaving me. You're saving your men. That's your job, Chief. To make the hard call." He looked at Jackson's still form. "He's got maybe 30 minutes before the shock and the infection kill him. You want to spend those 30 minutes dying with me, or do you want to spend them swimming toward that American destroyer?" The logic was a cold, hard spike, and it drove right through Martinez's code. He hated it. He hated this man, this ghost who had appeared out of nowhere and was now telling him how to do his job, how to abandon his principles. But he knew, with the sick certainty of a commander who has seen too much, that the man was right. "Willie," Martinez said, his voice thick with defeat. "Get ready to move." Williams nodded, his face grim. He looked at Brill. "What are you going to use?" Brill held up the pistol he'd taken from the dead sergeant at the checkpoint. "This," he said. He had 1 spare magazine. Maybe 15 rounds total. "And this." He picked up Williams's rifle. "How many left?" 4, Williams said. He handed Brill his last few loose rounds. The gunboat was at 70 yards. The commander had lowered his binoculars and was shouting an order. A team of soldiers with rifles was moving to the rail. "It's time," Brill said. "Don't look back. Just swim." Martinez took a deep breath. "Goddamn you, Ghost." "Get him home," Brill said, nodding toward Jackson. Martinez and Williams grabbed the unconscious medic. "On three," Martinez whispered. 1, 2. They didn't wait for three. They rolled over the side, a clumsy, desperate splash pulling Jackson with them. They surfaced a moment later, 2 heads and a floating body, and immediately began to swim away, stroking hard, trying to put distance between themselves and the raft. The North Korean commander saw it. He shouted, confused. He raised his binoculars again, trying to make sense of it. Why would they abandon their boat? Brill gave him something else to look at. He stood up on the sinking, unstable raft. He raised the rifle to his shoulder. He took his time. He didn't aim for the commander. He aimed for the man next to him, the one with the radio headset. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The man with the headset jerked and fell back, out of sight. The deck of the gunboat erupted in chaos. The commander screamed an order. The soldiers at the rail, who had been watching the swimmers, swung their rifles around and opened fire on Brill. Brill dropped flat as bullets tore through the air, ripping the last of the air from the Zodiac's tubes. The raft shuddered and sank lower, the deck now completely underwater. He was lying in 6 inches of churning, freezing water. He fired again, a single shot at a soldier who was leaning over the rail, trying to get a clear shot. The soldier yelped and ducked back. The heavy cannon on the bow swiveled toward him. Brill knew he had seconds. He ditched the rifle, it was useless now, and drew his pistol. He waited. The cannon fired. The sound was a deafening roar. The 37mm shell didn't hit the raft. It hit the water 10 feet in front of it. The explosion was immense, a column of water that shot 50 feet into the air, drenching him, trying to flip the raft. He held on, his knuckles white. He pushed himself up on one knee. The gunboat was at 40 yards. He could see the faces of the crew now, their expressions a mixture of anger and confusion. He raised his pistol and began to fire, not wildly but with a cold, deliberate aim. He shot at the gunner behind the cannon. He shot at a sailor who was pointing at him. He shot at the windows of the bridge. His rounds pinged harmlessly off the steel hull, but that wasn't the point. He was an insult. A single man on a sinking raft, defying a warship. He was making it personal. The gunboat's commander was screaming, enraged. He wanted this man dead. He didn't care about the swimmers anymore. He didn't care about taking a prisoner. He just wanted the ghost erased. The bow cannon fired again. This time it was closer, the explosion rocking the raft violently. The second cannon on the stern joined in. The sea around Brill became a hellscape of explosions and shrapnel. He was in the center of a storm, a lone figure of defiance, firing his pistol until the slide locked back empty. He dropped the useless gun and grabbed the K-bar knife from his belt. He held it up, its blade glinting in the gray light, and he yelled, a raw, wordless cry of pure defiance at the warship bearing down on him. Chapter 24. Brill held the knife, its blade a sliver of defiance against the gray sea. The North Korean gunboat was 30 yards away, a wall of steel and anger. The twin 37mm cannons on its bow were traversing, lining up for the kill shot. The commander on the bridge was screaming, his face purple with rage. He didn't want to just sink the raft. He wanted to atomize it. He wanted to erase the insult. Brill was ready to die. He wasn't happy about it, but he was ready. It was a clean death, a professional's death. He had bought the swimmers time. He had done the job. Then the world changed. It started not with a sound, but with a feeling. A deep, resonant vibration in the water, a pressure change in the air. It was the feeling of a much bigger predator entering the pond. The first shell from the USS Leviathan was a whisper, a faint, high-pitched whistle that was barely audible over the waves. It wasn't aimed at the gunboat. It was a marker. It landed 100 yards past the North Korean vessel, erupting in a waterspout that was impossibly, terrifyingly huge. It was a geyser 100 feet high, a white column of pure, unadulterated power. It was a 5-inch shell from a Mk-45 naval gun, and it was the American way of clearing its throat. The commander on the gunboat froze. Every man on his deck froze. They stared at the colossal waterspout, and in that moment they understood their mistake. They had been so focused on the gnat buzzing around their head that they hadn't paid attention to the battleship that had just sailed into their living room. The Leviathan spoke again. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a roar that shook the sea. The shell wasn't a marker. It was a message. It screamed over Brill's head and hit the water 20 yards from the gunboat's stern. The explosion lifted the back of the boat clear out of the water, its propellers spinning uselessly in the air. The concussion wave hit Brill's raft like a physical blow, flipping it over and throwing him into the churning sea. He came up sputtering, the cold a shock to his system. He saw the gunboat, crippled, its rudder gone, sitting dead in the water. The crew was in a panic, running on the decks, shouting, pointing at the American warship that was now closing the distance with an implacable, terrifying speed. The Leviathan wasn't done talking. Her phalanx CIWS, the close-in weapon system, the last line of defense, spun to life. The sound was like a giant ripping a canvas sheet the size of the sky. It was the sound of 4,500 rounds a minute. A stream of 20mm Vulcan cannon shells, a solid line of tracers, reached out from the Leviathan and touched the gunboat. It didn't just hit the gunboat, it erased it. The tracers walked up the side of the hull, shredding steel, blowing out the bridge windows, and turning the men on deck into a red mist. The boat's superstructure disintegrated. The twin cannons on the bow were ripped from their mountings. A secondary explosion blossomed from the boat's fuel tanks, a bloom of orange and black that was swallowed a moment later by the relentless, surgical storm of the CIWS. In 10 seconds, the gunboat was gone. All that was left was a patch of burning oil on the water and some floating debris. Brill treaded water, watching the awesome, terrible display of American firepower. He was in the middle of what the Navy called a danger-close situation, where friendly fire was not just a risk, but a statistical certainty. He looked for the swimmers. He saw them, 3 heads bobbing in the waves 100 yards away. They were alive. The Leviathan was almost on them now, a mountain of gray steel moving at 20 knots. Hatches were open on her side, and sailors were throwing lines and nets into the water. A fast response boat was being lowered from its davits. Brill started swimming toward Martinez and the others. His body was numb with cold, his muscles screaming in protest. He reached them as the American fast boat roared up, its crew shouting instructions. "Get the wounded man first," Martinez yelled, holding up Jackson. Hands reached down, pulling the unconscious medic from the water. Then they pulled Martinez up, his face a mask of pain as they jostled his wounded shoulder. Williams was next. Finally, a sailor looked at Brill. "Give me your hand," he shouted. Brill took the offered hand and let himself be hauled out of the sea, collapsing onto the deck of the response boat. He lay there for a moment, the hard deck vibrating under him, the sky wheeling overhead. The boat sped back toward the Leviathan. The North Korean coastline was a distant, hazy line behind them. The warship loomed over them, and as they were lifted up to the main deck, Brill saw Captain Reynolds standing by the rail. The captain's face was grim, but his eyes, when they met Brill's, held a new expression. It wasn't hostility. It was a grudging, profound respect. Medics swarmed them as soon as they were on deck. They put Jackson on a gurney and rushed him toward the ship's sickbay. Another team started working on Martinez, cutting away his jacket to get to the gunshot wound. "I need a report," Reynolds said, his voice cutting through the organized chaos. He was looking at Martinez. "Chief Petty Officer Martinez, sir," Martinez said, his voice weak but steady. "SEAL Team 6. 2 Kia, Petty Officer Shen and 1 other. 2 wounded, myself and Petty Officer Jackson. 1 rescued, operative." He nodded toward Brill. Reynolds looked at Brill, who was standing apart, water pooling at his feet. And you? I was never here, Brill said. Reynolds nodded slowly. I see. He turned to a communications officer. Get me a flash message to CINCPAC. Tell them the package is secure. I want to be in international waters in 30 minutes. The captain turned back to Brill. You did good work. I did a job, Brill said. He watched as they wheeled Martinez past him. The SEAL team leader was pale, but he was alive. He looked at Brill, and for the first time, Martinez gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of thanks. It was a nod of acceptance. Brill just stood there, dripping on the deck of the American warship, the ghost who had come back from the dead, surrounded by the noise and the light and the life of a world he didn't belong to. Chapter 25. They gave him a set of dry clothes, standard Navy-issue coveralls that were a size too small and smelled of industrial soap. They gave him a mug of coffee that was thick enough to stand a spoon in and tasted of burnt metal. He stood at the rail on the fantail, the same spot where he'd stood when he first came aboard, and watched the coast of North Korea disappear into the blackness. The ship was running without lights, a dark leviathan sliding through international waters at flank speed. The mission was over. The young seaman who had called him a spook walked past, carrying a coil of rope. He saw Brill, and this time he didn't grin. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, his eyes wide, and kept walking, a little faster than before. News traveled fast on a ship. The whole crew knew. They didn't know what had happened, not really, but they knew the ghost had gone into the dark and come back with some of the living and all of the dead. Captain Reynolds found him there an hour later. The captain wasn't wearing his formal jacket anymore. He was in his shirt sleeves, his tie loosened, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He looked tired. He looked 10 years older than the man who had given Brill his briefing. They're asking for you in sickbay, Reynolds said. He didn't offer Brill a drink. He knew better. Who's asking? Brill said, not taking his eyes off the ship's wake. Williams. The sniper. The other two. Martinez is out of surgery. The bullet went clean through, but it tore up the muscle pretty bad. He'll live. Jackson, the medic, he's critical. The infection is bad. They're doing what they can. What does Williams want? He didn't say, Reynolds said. Just that he wanted to see you. Brill thought about it for a moment, then pushed himself off the rail. He walked past Reynolds without a word. The captain didn't try to stop him. The sickbay was a sterile white box that smelled of antiseptic and blood. It was quiet, the only sound the rhythmic beep of monitors. Williams was in a bed near the door, his hands professionally bandaged, an IV drip in his arm. He looked small and washed out under the fluorescent lights. He saw Brill and pushed himself up slightly. Hey. You wanted to see me, Brill said. He stood by the door, not coming any closer. Yeah, Williams said. He looked at his bandaged hands. The doc says I'll get most of the feeling back. Might even be able to shoot again someday. With a lot of physical therapy. He looked up at Brill. Shen. And the other man, the one who was with you at the pass. Did he? He died, Brill said. He bought you time. Williams nodded slowly, his eyes closing for a second. He was a good man. The best of us, maybe. He was always calm. He could look at a problem, take it apart in his head and find the answer. Even at the end. He found the answer, Brill confirmed. Yeah. Williams was quiet for a long moment. Listen. What you did back there. All of it. I've never seen anything like it. You saw a man doing a job, Brill said. No, Williams said, his voice firm. I saw a man who was better at his job than anyone I've ever met. We wouldn't be here without you. None of us. He held out his good hand, an awkward gesture with the bandages. I just wanted to say thank you. Brill looked at the offered hand, then at Williams's face. He didn't take it. He just gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He turned and walked out of the sickbay, leaving Williams alone with the beeping machines. He found Reynolds in his private cabin. The room was paneled in dark wood, a small island of civility in the middle of a war machine. A map of the Korean peninsula was spread out on a large table. "The official report is being written," Reynolds said, pouring himself another drink. He didn't bother offering again. SEAL Team 6, on a deep-sea training exercise, encountered a catastrophic failure with their submersible. A sudden storm complicated search and rescue efforts. 2 men were lost at sea, their bodies unrecoverable. 2 were rescued, suffering from exposure and injuries sustained during the accident. He looked up from his drink. There is no mention of North Korea. There is no mention of a compound or a gunboat. And there is no mention of you. "Good," Brill said. "No bodies, no crimes, no witnesses," Reynolds said, quoting the original order. "Just as they asked." He took a long swallow of his drink. "But there were witnesses, weren't there?" "Me. My crew. The 2 men in sick bay. We all saw you. We know what you did. You saw what you needed to see to get your men back," Brill said. "The details get fuzzy after that. The reports get classified. People forget." "I won't forget," Reynolds said. "I gave you a suicide mission, and you came back with survivors. I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," Brill said. "You were an asset. This ship was an asset. The mission is over. The debt is paid." A low rhythmic thump-thump-thump began to vibrate through the deck. It was a sound that didn't belong to the ship. It was the sound of helicopter rotors. Reynolds looked surprised. "We don't have any flight operations scheduled." He picked up his phone to call the bridge. "Don't bother," Brill said. "It's for me." Reynolds put the phone down. He understood. Of course. The ghost wouldn't just walk off the ship in a friendly port. He would disappear the same way he appeared, out of nowhere into the night. "Where will you go?" Reynolds asked. Brill didn't answer. He walked to the door. "Wingfield," Reynolds said. Brill stopped, his hand on the handle, but he didn't turn around. "The men who sent you, the men who give these orders. Do they ever thank you?" Brill was silent for a moment. "They pay me," he said. He opened the door and walked out. He walked through the ship's corridors, a ghost in borrowed clothes. Sailors flattened themselves against the bulkheads to let him pass. He went up the ladders to the flight deck. The night air was cold and sharp. A black unmarked helicopter, a Sikorsky MH-60S Nighthawk, was sitting on the deck, its rotors spinning in a slow, powerful arc. The side door was open. 2 men in black flight suits and helmets sat inside, their faces obscured by dark visors. They were as anonymous as the helicopter. Brill walked across the flight deck, the wind from the rotors tearing at him. He didn't look back at the ship's superstructure. He didn't look for Captain Reynolds. He just walked to the open door of the helicopter. He put 1 foot on the skid and swung himself inside. The man in the flight suit handed him a headset. Brill put it on, the world outside dissolving into a muffled hum. The helicopter lifted off the deck, its ascent smooth and powerful. Brill looked out the open door. The USS Leviathan fell away below him, a dark shape cutting through a black sea, already becoming part of the past. He didn't watch it go. He turned his face forward, toward the empty night sky and the next job. The end.